Don't know who's not here today. Yeah, I know. Senator Beitman. Here. Senator Brennan. Here. Senator Rothfuss.
Here.
Senator Steinmetz.
Here.
Representative Allred.
He's excused.
Oh, he has just logged on. Representative Andrew.
Here.
Representative Berger.
Here.
Representative Brown.
Excused.
Representative Clausten.
Again excused.
Representative Lawley. Representative Obermueller.
Excused.
Representative Provenza. Co-Chairman Northrup.
Here.
Chairman Scott.
Here,
You have a quorum.
okay. Good thing we've got a
Yeah.
quorum. We're going to start, first on the agenda is the career and technical education. And we've got a couple of draft bills, and then we're going to look at the overview of the Wyoming Works in Wyoming tomorrow. And we'll take public comment on each of the bills right after we've had the introduction on them. So LSO 25 LSO 0096 CTE funding.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Tanya Heitrick, Legislative Service Office. This bill draft is related to Agenda Item 11. It's 25 LSO 0096, Committee Formal Draft 1.0, Career Technical Education Funding. Recall this draft is in response to the committee's directive of its June meeting to restore the funding for career technical education equipment and supplies to pre-2005 levels. Looking at the bottom of page 1, beginning on line 12, this amends Wyoming Statute 2113-101, and the amendment is actually contained on page 2, lines 3 through 6. And this isn't necessarily related to the committee's directive, but currently in law, the reference to attachment A is incorrect. There are additional modifications that were made to attachment A aside from the 2012 session law that's noted there. We've corrected this to ensure that it's accurate. Moving on to the amendments to 2113-309. This is the statute directing the operation of the education block grant model, page 2, line 12 through page 4, line 4. And if you look at page 3, line 13 specifically, this is also a conforming amendment. A number of years ago, all of the references to vocational education were replaced with career technical education, and unfortunately, this was missed. I would note with both of these amendments that I've spoken about, in the event this bill draft does not move forward, I think they are appropriate for the reviser's bill, but I also think it's appropriate to include them within this bill draft. Section 2 is really where you see the amendment directed by the committee, and that is on page 4. It starts on line 6, moving on to page 5, line 11. Draws in the relevant provision of attachment A necessary to operationalize the committee's directive, and also conforms the terminology that I mentioned earlier. Attachment A has not been amended to reference career and technical education. That is the appropriate term utilized elsewhere in statute. I would draw the committee's attention to the language specifically on page 5, lines 7 through 10. This is where you'll see it is now the greater of $9,428.77 per FTE per FTE career and technical education teacher, or $18,857.57 for equipment and supplies. Section 3, contained on page 5, lines 13 through 20, clarifies that this change is only for the calculation of equipment and supplies, and as noted in attachment A, as we previously discussed. Otherwise, that calculation should be maintained by the Department of Education. Moving on to page 4, or excuse me, page 6, but section 4, lines 1 through 15, contains an appropriation of $350,000 from the Public School Foundation Program account to the Department of Education's School Finance Division for the increase contained in the previous section. Page 6, line 17 is section 5. This is the effective date of the act, and the effective date is July 1st of 2025. Subject to your questions about the bill draft, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Wilmarth also has a memo that he'll discuss.
Questions on the bill draft before we go there? Okay, we may come back to that further. Mr. Wilmarth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Matt Wilmarth, LSO, Senior School Finance Analyst. Within your meeting materials, you have a memo that relates to this bill. It expands upon the bill draft in two ways. First, it provides additional details and estimated impact to the education resource block grant model and summarizes really what the intent of this legislation is. If you recall, in the June meeting, the committee heard various information on CTE program funding within the education resource block grant model. And there was a footnote within that issue brief that highlighted how CTE funding was previously done prior to the 2005 recalibration. One of those formulas provided at least a minimum of 2 program funding for school districts to receive funding for CTE materials and equipment. So what we've tried to do is take a similar approach, not an identical approach, but a similar approach, because the two models are completely different, and replicate that approach for the current model. You'll note within the memo and in the attachment A in section 2, the amounts don't align, and that's intentional because section 3 requires the Department of Education to inflate the amount within attachment A by the ECAs that have been enacted by the legislature since the 2017 amendment. So for purposes of estimating the cost, the current education resource block grant model provides $14,184.68 per CTE teacher FTE. And so a district or a school, actually, a school will receive twice that amount if, well, they will receive a minimum of twice that amount if their CTE teacher FTEs in the approved programs under the Department of Education are not equal to 2. So running based on school year 2022-23 data, since I did not have school year 23-24 data available at the time of this memo, the estimated impact is $312,000. We put $350,000 in the appropriation just to provide some buttressing in case there's an ECA enacted this session or upcoming session, or if the FTE amounts are lower, just provides a little bit more wiggle room on that estimate. We'll precise these estimates if this bill moves forward through the fiscal note process. And also just to provide a little bit more context is how many schools are impacted by this. Using the school year 22-23 data, there are 29 of the 79 schools that reported data and that have fewer than 2 FTEs. And so those 29 schools would then receive additional funding under this proposed bill. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to take any further questions.
Committee, any questions? Okay, I'm going to have some. By amending the attachment A where the formula we're essentially changing the formula for how the schools get how much money? Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, so under current law, for each reported career and technical education FTE, an additional $14,184.68 is provided per FTE. And what this does is provides additional funding for those high schools that have reported fewer than 2 CTE teacher FTEs. And they get a minimum of $28,369.36.
Okay, so they get that amount. Do they have to spend it in the CTE area?
No,
So it's part of the block grant and they can spend it any way they want to.
Mr. Chairman, correct. It is contained as part of their foundation program account within the education resource block grant model.
Okay. And they get this extra money by having fewer than 2 CTEs. Is it enough money to motivate some of the others to get into that category?
Mr. Chairman, it is fewer than 2 CTE teachers in approved courses. So it's a reporting of CTE teachers in approved courses under the current statutory requirement that has a sequence of 3 courses. And so, if school districts report fewer than 2 teachers, then they will get that additional funding under this provision.
Okay. What happens if we pass the bill without the appropriation? Because that, the bills can lose appropriations on the way through the.
Mr. Chairman, the Department of Education would utilize its current appropriations to pay for it. This is the estimated cost. We estimate the appropriations at the beginning of the biennium to estimate what entitlement payments would be paid by the state of Wyoming. Recall a school district whose local revenues exceed the foundation program account or amount are recapture districts. The formula works regardless of the state appropriation. So a school district under this, who's a recapture district, would receive this funding and it would reduce the recapture amount that would come back if a school district or a school within a recapture district receives funding. The state would not send any additional funding out to that school district. Their local revenues would pay for that additional cost. The appropriation just ensures that the funding is made available. It'd be part of the entitlement payment process, but regardless, the state would be required to pay this to entitlement districts, and the recapture districts would have their amounts reduced.
So the underlying law here would govern, and without the appropriation, that amount of money would be spent. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
So what we're really doing is an increase for some selected schools in the total amount of money they'll receive, and they can use it as they damn well please.
Mr. Chairman, it's part of their block grant. Those board of trustees make those decisions.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz has a question.
Okay, Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think along the same lines, I think that you're headed down. If a district has not decided to make CTE a priority in their district for their students, or haven't seen a need for it, I'm just curious as to what incentive just giving them more money has in advancing our goal of expanding CTE. It almost seems backwards to me that we're giving money to people that haven't made it a priority, and then we're not rewarding those who have. So I guess if you could explain that rationale, or maybe there's someone else later on in testimony that could tell us why we've decided to approach it in this way when we really have no control over the fact that, you know, we're trying to accomplish a goal here, and I don't know how we can make sure that it actually happens. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, the directive of the committee was to increase the education resource block grant model and the career technical education equipment supplies and material component. And this bill draft doesn't change the operation of how those funds flow to districts and the latitude that districts have to expend those funds. There's no provision in law currently under the current CTE adjustment that requires school districts to spend those funds on CTE programs. In fact, you have received a number of reports from the Department of Education with that expenditure data, district by district, and we know that they're not spending the full allocation under the block grant model on CTE programs. But as far as this bill draft goes, it simply increases one component of the model and continues to allow school districts to make choices for their school district.
So if we decide to move forward this bill and it passes, we'll have increased funding for certain school districts and they can then use it the way they want to. If we decide this is an issue for the recalibration, then the effect will be that those districts won't get this increase, which is, we're appropriating $350,000, but you think it's really a little less than that. Is that a correct understanding of the bill that's before us?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that's accurate. The appropriation is in there just to ensure whatever increase is provided within the block grant, that there is sufficient funds, regardless of it's an entitlement district or a recapture district, to pay for that cost.
But if the appropriation gets removed during the course of the legislature, the funds are still there. Does it mean if the appropriation isn't adequate, we automatically invade the LISRA account? Is that what happens?
Mr. Chairman, the payments would come from the school foundation program account, and it would increase school district funding. It would reduce any recapture revenue to the recapture districts. It would still increase funding. Removing the appropriation does not remove the fiscal impact in total.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator
I believe that,
Northrup.
yeah.
Representative Northrup.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe it'd be good to hear from the districts and how they're spending the
Yes.
money and how they're utilizing it. And
We will do that. Committee, any further questions for the LSO on this bill? LSO need a little advice. Are we more efficient to look at both bills at once, or should we deal with this one first and then go to the second one, which is a good deal more complicated?
Mr. Chairman, I think the second bill is a bit more complicated, and you should maybe take them up separately. There's a number of policy choices in the second bill.
Okay, good, thank you. Is Department of Education here and wanting to comment?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Pleasure to be here this morning with you. My name is Wanda Maloney. I'm with the Department of Education. I am here on behalf of the superintendent to speak in favor of this bill. She did bring this forward during the June meeting, and the request was really looking at the smaller districts to have additional materials and supplies. We understand that when you're in a small district, the cost of standing up these type of programs is very expensive. And, you know, if you're dealing with 5 students, you still need the same piece of equipment that you would need for 25 or more. Thank you for your time. I would stand for any questions.
Any questions? Let me ask one then. In your judgment, what is the probability that the money will in fact be spent, extra money will in fact be spent on CTE as opposed to being diverted to other uses?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that question is best answered by our districts to determine the use of those
You don't have an
funds.
opinion. Anybody else? Thank you very much. School districts and other interested parties, first come, first serve, come on forward and tell us who you are and what you think. You've heard some discussion of the issues now. And do introduce yourselves for the record. We've seen you before, but still.
Sure. No. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jessie Defoe with the Wyoming Association for Career and Technical Education, and with me,
Mr. Chairman, I'm Rob Hill. I serve as the Public Policy Chairman for the Wyoming Association of Career and Technical Education.
thank you. And we're here to speak in favor of this piece of legislation today, to really follow up from the last meeting and appreciate the conversations that has taken place for career and technical education. We see the need all across the state, and to be able to continue that conversation, we're very grateful for. We do think that this legislation accomplishes what we thought the intent was, and that's just an attempt to equalize the funding for our small and medium-sized schools. No matter if you're in Shoshone or Casper, that laser or welder is going to cost the same, and you're still going to need materials to go ahead and to complete those projects. And so we feel that this piece of legislation would accomplish that. It's just ensuring that all our small school districts can actually train our students to be competitive when they enter the industry workforce. And so that's what we're trying to accomplish. We do believe that there's need for accountability, and we're, always up for that conversation. Maybe it's if they've expended their 29% that they're eligible for this additional funds. But we do think that this at least allows the conversation and opens it up for school districts who are doing the right thing and trying to provide for us a workforce in Wyoming. And so with that, we're happy to answer some questions the best we can, and provide any more comment.
Mr. Chairman, in case you had some technical questions, I was here to answer.
Committee. Okay. Let me ask the question then we asked the previous witness. If we pass this, do you think this money will in fact go to career and technical education, or will it be diverted to other uses?
Mr. Chairman, on that subject, what we look to is the expenditures on the additional 29%. So when we've looked at it historically, we've seen the smaller to medium-sized schools have a greater percentage of that expenditure being fully utilized.
Okay, so you think that it will go to the,
Yeah, and as we, not to get ahead of ourselves on the next bill, but one of the conversations on that is if the 29%, 0.29% is fully expended, there might be some other additional funds tied to that. So we're looking at a 2-year rolling average look back on that, and this could be similar if that was a direction the committee wanted to go. But it kind of incentivizes, and if a district is spending it, then maybe this other pool might be available.
Mr. Chairman.
so Representative North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'd like for you to walk through for the committee's benefit, because a number of people here have not been through recalibration, don't understand how 0.29 FTE works and how that's calibrated throughout. And I should have asked Matt to do this, but and how that money flows, and then how much money that would be, not how much, but let's talk relative school districts. I mean, we have Meeteetse, Claremont, and Tensleep, a lot of small districts that do not have a lot of students, and so they are not able to generate that money as compared to Casper or Douglas or Powell or others. So can you briefly summarize that, our discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Call on the witnesses for that, and then I'm going to go to Mr. Wilmarth.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Wilmar is definitely more qualified to answer the funding formula on that. But the premise that small schools and smaller class sizes has a definite impact on the funds is a fact there, because they have smaller class sizes. It's going to generate less revenue at the local level.
Wilmarth.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, the 29% weight was developed in response to the legislature's directive to provide CTE funding. I think it was part of Campbell 1 or Campbell 2. But what it does is it provides additional teacher resources to school districts for those students enrolled in grades 9 through 12 in those approved CTE courses by the Department of Education. And that student FTE is multiplied by 29%. And it is then divided by the class size of the model for high schools of 21. And that 29% generates a additional student weight. And then divided by 21 of the class size of the high school model. And that generates an additional FTE amount for those schools. And what that does is provides, at the time, the 29% weight was the estimated class size of CTE programs that ranged from around 14 to 15 students. So what that additional FTE does is provide smaller class sizes for those CTE programs and adds additional teacher resources to the block grant model. And so that's been in existence, I believe, since 2002 or 2003.
So then is my understanding correct that this depends on the number of students, this amount, getting this money depends on the number of students that are in the career and technical education area that are enrolled in that. And if the school district diverts it elsewhere and that winds up with less materials and students abandon the program, they lose the money. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, the 29% weight is dependent upon the number of students enrolled in those CTE courses. What I would say is high schools are guaranteed a minimum of 10 FTE teachers, regardless of, if they're greater than 49 students. So what happens in the model is you generate your core number of teachers based upon your ADM of the school. You get 33% of specialist teachers. We add in for the high schools the additional 29% weight of the CT teachers. If that's less than 10, then the minimum teacher is generated to ensure at least 10 teachers in that school. So a school who generates the 29% weight but loses enrollment and still gets that guaranteed of 10 minimum teachers, this 29% weight would not impact them if they lose student enrollment. It's for those schools greater than or generating greater than the 10 minimum teachers, where a loss of CTE students would impact their teacher allocation.
Okay, so in the not in the very smallest schools, but in the somewhat larger ones, but still relatively small, diverting this money from CTE to other purposes runs the risk of losing the money. Is that?
Mr. Chairman, correct.
Okay. Representative Northrup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd also like to point out that inflation has really has really chewed up this money. Expendables like welding rod, gas, and steel have all doubled in the last few years if anybody's had to go buy any of that stuff. And so this is also can be used for that kind of expenditures. And that's part of this is a little bit of inflation cushioning, because they've had the same amount of money for many years, and you just keep on whittling away on what's available, because unless you're going to supplement the program through some other source of the block grant, then you're looking at cutting it back all the time.
frankly, what I'm trying to do is figure out the probability that the money is going to wind up being used as the bill intends for it to be used, as opposed to being just a general increase that gets rated for other purposes. Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question that may be better asked by or answered by the department, but of the schools, the 29 that qualify, these smaller schools, what do we know about whether they're using their CTE money? I mean, I just know the ones in my district, like we mentioned, Ten Sleep, is running an excellent CTE program with the little funding and would benefit from this. So, I mean, I think we're working on a premise that some do and some don't, but we haven't zeroed in on these 29 that would qualify under this and how they're doing, what they're doing with their CTE money. So do we have that data? Can we get that data?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Lawley, when we look at this data, we use data that's provided to WDE from local school districts. As an example, several years ago, a material supply and grant bill was passed, and in that, it required a 5-year look back to see if expenditures had taken place. And we found that 11 districts qualified for that one. So, but that means maybe 1 year they didn't expend it all, and so they were ineligible. So maybe a rolling average is a better way to look at it in the future. But that's how we've looked at it to determine that.
Mr. Chairman?
Follow up?
Okay, follow up.
Yes, thank you. I agree with you as far as possibly a rolling average, but I know on the grants we did work on over the last 2 years, we did zero in on only way you could be eligible for those grants for additional CT supply money was by having used or have set aside, which is an issue for smaller districts, set aside money for specific equipment and things that they kind of rolled over. So, I mean, that's how we're handling the grants to try to deal with this. But I just wonder if the problem of districts not using CTE occurs that much in these smaller schools, or is that a problem typical of larger school districts? So I mean, I have my own theory about it, but I would love to know some data, because I honestly think that many of these smaller schools are using every bit they have, but it's very difficult for them to navigate the landscape of setting up quality CTE programs for these students with the money they have. Like I said, I always hold out Ten Sleep as a good example of a small district that has managed well every penny. But it's really tough on them. So, you know, that data would be very helpful, because we might be talking about something that's not that big of a problem for those who qualify under this particular proposed legislation.
Mr. Chairman, in response to your comments, Representative Lawley, smaller schools and medium-sized schools or districts, due to pure scale, have a easier opportunity to fulfill all of their expenditures. Because if they're getting $12,000 or $15,000 in additional funds, it's easier to meet that threshold. When there's a significantly larger amount of funds provided to a large district, the scale can make it harder to go above that.
Thank you.
I'm good. She actually hit on my point.
Okay,
Thank you.
anything further? Thank you very much. Anybody else? Anybody else want to speak to this bill? Okay. School Boards Association and the Administrators Association, is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Boyd Brown, Wyoming Association of School Administrators. I guess I have experience on both ends of this. I've been the superintendent of the largest district and the smallest district in the state. I think some of the issue comes back to the way we code that money when we spend it. I don't know of one school, secondary school out there that does not have a CTE program that runs all the way down to 7th grade or 6th grade. So some of that money is spent, at least in the districts that I was at, and most of the districts that I know of, in those mid-levels, whether it's 6th through 8 or 7th and 8th grade, and we have, excuse me, and we have CTE programs there, and we need to have those CTE programs there to give those students that opportunity to see what they want to do. Do they want to get into a hard technology such as welding or fabrication or ag, or are they more interested in the technology area of going with computers or something else like that? So that's some of where that goes. But our smaller schools do need that opportunity to have a little more money to either increase the number of opportunities that they have because they can get somebody that's qualified in other areas, or to get more materials, just like Representative Northrup said. So I think that's one of the issues that when you look at the data as just pure data, the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, if they're running CTE programs in that, we're spending money on that, but it's not getting counted that way. It's getting counted as being in an elective area or a supplemental teacher area. And with that, I'll stop and turn it over to
Mr. Chairman, Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association. I just want to begin by reemphasizing something that Dr. Brown said. When we look at data, and it appears from the data that some districts are not expending CTE funds, there's a couple of things we should know about that. Number one, CTE programs are driven by student interest. And so school districts are going to offer programs when their students sign up for them, when their students want them. So to the degree that the district is able to offer those programs, they generally do. Sometimes they're unable to offer certain programs because of the inability to hire staff for those certain programs. But it's number one, driven by student interest. And so it is rare that you find a district that is not providing something that meets the needs of the students. Number two, when you're looking at buying equipment for CTE, some of that equipment can be extremely expensive. Your one-year allocation is not going to come close to buying it. So you may not expend in year one, you may not expend in year two, but that expenditure in year three might be for that very expensive equipment.
That's more relevant, the second, not this one. This one is talking, the amounts we're talking here are not large enough for major equipment, are they? Or is it by the nature of the amounts?
Mr.
Talking about the supplies to operate the equipment.
Mr. Chairman, I think you're right on it. If I get that money, I have up to 30% that I can save in my reserves. And I may have to save, and I will tell you that we saved for 3 years to buy a piece of equipment in Claremont. I didn't save for 3 years. Mr. Oskey saved for the first 2 years. I saved for the third year to be able to buy a plasma cutter that we needed for our students. So it is some of our general fund money and also the grants that you'd be able to apply for.
So, Mr. Chairman, the answer is to both, more so to the second bill, but potentially to both. And so that's just an issue about the data. As to what happens in our smaller districts and whether or not the expenditures from this specific legislation would be spent toward that purpose, I think you've heard from others that it is our smallest districts that have the greatest challenge of having adequate funding, and this is legislation targeted toward those districts. So that increases the likelihood that they would be so served.
Is this really going to the smallest districts or the next tier up? Because there was a minimum, was there not, Mr. Wilmarth, on the smallest districts?
No, Mr. Chairman, this is school-specific. So
School-specific.
it's for those schools that report fewer than 2 FTE teachers, CTE teachers. So Natrona County School District, Midwest High School, and Roosevelt High School would be included. So 2 schools in Natrona County. Albany County, I wouldn't consider them small. Sweetwater County, number 1 and 2. Teton County School District, number 1. Lincoln County School District Number 2 has 2 schools that would qualify.
Now, number 2 is Kemmer,
Number 2 is Star Valley.
Star Valley.
So again, it is based upon the school, not the district.
Okay.
Thank you. It, you know, what I'm afraid we see as a general rule is that we hear about specific situations that need more funding. They're used to ratchet up the total expenditures, and then it gets spent on something entirely different, and we've basically lost all control of what's going on. And that's why I'm keep asking, is this money actually likely to go to the CTE?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to just say that we have locally elected school boards who are responsible for approving the budget. And I would tell you, in the districts that I've been in, whenever we've moved money towards CTE programs and we pay our CTE program teachers better than the model allows us to pay, that money goes where we think that it needs to be. And it may not be exactly where everybody would like it to be, but for the most part, they're going to try to get it into those CTE programs. They know that those are important for our kids. We want our kids to be ready for life, whether it's work, whether it's technical school, community college, or the military. We want them to be prepared. And so those school districts are going to do what they need to do to get those kids ready for what they think they need to get them ready for.
Mr. Chairman, another point, I appreciate Mr. Wilmarth's explanation of school-specific, because when you look at Natrona County, you have sort of a unique experience that so many of your CTE programs are at the Pathway Center, as opposed to, say, Natrona County High School or Kelly Walsh. And so it would be dependent upon, again, the needs of specific schools and specific districts. Are we able to cover all of the student needs at Pathways, or are there some classes at Natrona here that we would be seeking that support for?
Does, no.
And Mr. Chairman, I think it goes, what Dr. Brown was saying is, I don't know that we are well prepared to speak toward each school district's position or what they're doing, other than to speak generally and say, when a district approaches this, that's how they're looking at it. They're looking at what is our student need, not with the idea of, okay, if we have some extra funding, can we spend it in another place? For the most part, when there are CTE dollars, we're looking to expend those on those student needs.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Anybody else? Okay. We'll close the public testimony. Committee, you've heard the discussion on the bill. You're dealing with a relatively small amount of money here. The question is it something that ought to wait for the recalibration? We'll have to answer that question. We bring this forward as a committee bill. We'll have to be able to answer that question on the floor, because I think this is one that would be ripe for the argument that deal with this issue and the whole recalibration. We've got the question of will the money actually go for the CTE? You've heard the discussion on that, as opposed to just being used to ratchet up the total expenditures. What's your pleasure on the bill? I don't see the need to carry this one over to the next time. We can deal with it right now. Do I hear a motion on the bill?
Mr. Chairman, I'll move the bill forward.
Okay. Is the motion to carry it to next time or the motion to introduce it?
Yeah, to introduce it.
Okay, the motion is to introduce it. Is there a second?
There was one down there, I think Evie did.
There was a second. Okay. Been moved in second.
Mr. Chairman?
You've heard the issues, Senator Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To address a couple of the points that you raised about whether we should wait for recalibration or just do this, as we were discussing earlier, I've been on the recalibrations for the past 14 years. We don't tend to actually pass any successful legislation out of recalibration. That's not been our tradition in the last several recalibrations. If we actually want to do something, we just do it right now, and we will have the focus on it. The other aspect of recalibration is there are so many issues that are going on at the same time that it's actually pretty hard to focus on any one issue and give it the time that it deserves, whereas today we're having this discussion and we have a legislative session to talk about it. So I think it's appropriate for us to not expect a recalibration to solve a problem. That has not been my experience. We've identified problems very well. We have not solved them particularly cleverly. So if we see something that we can do here today to help build our career and technical education system, we know this is a priority of the people of Wyoming. We know this is something that is very important to our education system, then let's take the opportunity. And if there are concerns about exactly how it's implemented, we can work through those concerns. But I think there is a general agreement that our smaller districts struggle to have enough resources, and we need a bill to address that. This bill is a great vehicle for that, even if it's not perfect. And I recognize some of the concerns that have been raised about whether or not it's a categorical grant that has to be spent specifically on CTE or whether it's block grant. If we have this legislation, we can work through that. If we don't have the legislation, we're not going to sort that out.
We have a history of not getting the recalibrations done. And that is an issue in the court case. And that's one issue I expect is going to give us some trouble in the court case. And the last one, the Senate and the House were quite far apart. And then the feds dropped that massive stimulus thing. I think they passed it through the US Congress on the day that the Wyoming Senate was considering its version of the recalibration bill on second reading or something like that. And nobody, neither House nor the feds, understood what the effect of what they'd done was, but it had major effects on us. It made it very difficult to proceed on the recalibration. I think we're going to have to do a recalibration this time. But I hear your argument that that the issues there are so large and complicated, that something like this gets lost in the process. Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Berger has a comment.
Okay, Representative Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, as I think about this bill and as I think about CTEs in a whole, and I've heard a lot of discussion from the point of view with from Uinta One, and you think of a classroom, a CTE classroom that has a plasma cutter, and we think of that there, and we have about 15 to 18 kids that can fit into that classroom because of safety, and we do have a CTE teacher that does that. But the issue that we have in our district is that we can only serve 15 to 18 kids. What about the 150 kids that are trying to get into the classroom? And I think that's really common for big districts. This bill helps smaller districts. Yes, it could. Yes. But will it really solve the problem as a whole or help with the issue for all CTE programs throughout the entire state? And that's the thing that I see is every district has their unique set of circumstances for CTE. We have ours, and I'm just giving you our example. It's wonderful, and I commend all the efforts of all the school boards and districts trying to really solve this issue, because there's a lot of kids, especially in my district, standing in line trying to get into a CTE program because that's the direction they want to go for a career. And we just can't get them, we can't serve them all. And I can imagine that going on in a small district, that's hard. And it's hard to think about denying students the opportunity to be able to take these programs. It's really hard. And there's a lot more interest in it. So as much as I'm for this bill, I don't know if it solves anything, and I just, it's not there yet. I mean, I sure would like to see a bill that takes everything further, and really looks at helping districts, have their local control. So I don't know if I'm there yet. Thanks.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Senator Piteman. Senator Piteman? No. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support the bill in concept, but I do echo your concerns on, at some point, we're going to have the accountability factor, obviously this isn't a lot of money. It's a lot of money to me, but in the grand scheme of things of the state budget, it's not. I guess there's a couple ways to go about it. In the bill title, this bill doesn't allow for reporting requirements. I mean, it's something as simple as saying, if you're not going to spend it on CTE, the school district needs to report back to us what they spend it on, so we can actually have the data, what they spend it on and why. If they just socked it away for savings, great. If they're saving up for a bigger piece of equipment, that's what we need to know. If they hired a Spanish teacher with the money or some other teacher with the money, we need to know that too. That's good information. That's one way to do it. It's a lot less restrictive than restricting the funds, whether it's a categorical grant or restricted funds. So there's different ways to get there, but the way the bill is currently drafted, it doesn't allow for that to happen. So if we're going to do it, we need to do it today and figure out a way to do it.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you.
Senator Ruff.
On
Then
that,
I may come to Ellis.
sure, on that point, they already do extensive reporting, so we know exactly how every district spends its block grant. They wouldn't be able to say, well, we took that money and spent it here, because again, it's a block grant. So they would just say, we fell short of spending that money, and here's everything else we spent. So that reporting exists right now, and we can see that. We don't typically look into that level of detail, but we do get the crew report, which is going to give us effectively that analysis, so we can look back into it. And we can see, that's where we're seeing right now, that on a year-by-year basis, most districts have fallen short on their CTE, not all of them, but most have. So we would simply see that data again, that if districts weren't spending it, I mean, we might see that they spent more as a result of it. We might see it the same, so we'd effectively be in the same position. So the reporting, in my view, isn't necessary because we're getting it. It's just that there's not a lot we can do about it, so to speak, which I think is the concern. Yeah.
That's, you've provided the answer I was going to go to LSO for, I think correctly. Yeah, do you want to, LSO, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the Department of Education, I believe a few years ago, did do a more in-depth reporting on the CTE expenditures. It is a little bit complicated in that the block grant dollars, in some instances, get moved to a special reserve fund. Districts can move up to 10% of their annual budget to a special reserve fund for large purchases of supplies and materials. That's one of the allowable reasons to move funds to a special reserve fund. So when we look at the continued review of educational resources in Wyoming report, we'll get that in our September meeting from the Department of Education, and they'll go through the expenditures of the block grant model. They'll show how many teachers are hired, and they'll point out how many expenditures are made under this component of the block grant. It doesn't necessarily always capture those expenditures because a special reserve fund is not their general fund. And so those are some of the complicated issues with that. And districts also make purchases from their federal Perkins funding for the CTE programs, which is not block grant dollars. So it is a little bit, and it's also dependent upon districts actually reporting it in the function codes that are required. And I know districts sometimes don't always report their expenditures in that manner. So we have addressed that. I'll try to research that memo from a few years ago and send that to the committee because it looked at all of the revenue sources and their special reserve funds and the block grant dollars. So
Who actually does the crew report? Is it Department of Education?
yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Department of Education, we need to think about the crew report. I've tried to use it in the past and find it extremely user unfriendly. You can't get a picture of what's actually going on from what we get. It's so massive, it's not meaningfully summarized that I can tell. So I think this committee at some point is going to have to look pretty hard at the crew report to see what it really tells us about where the expenditures are really being made. It's a difficult report to use.
Mr. Chairman?
In the office.
On that, and I assume we'll get it next time, but typically WDE has provided us with a summary slide deck in recent years, and while the crew report itself tends to be onerous, the summary slide deck is usually a quite straightforward document and provides typically the last 10-ish years of spending in each category, and then has tabulated comparisons between model funding and expenses statewide. Now, if you want it at a district level, then you do have to generate reports within the crew report. So it's powerful, but I think it can generate anything, and that's, again, something where if you have something in mind, I have no doubt that our experts in their data system can produce that. But I guess I'll ask and maybe just look for a nod. Are we getting that at our September meeting? I assume that's one of our materials. Okay, so we'll see the summary document in the September meeting for the statewide.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz has her hand up again.
Senator Steinmetz, do you wish to speak? If so, now's your chance.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to go back to what we were talking about as far as where the funds will be spent rather than just being in the block grant, I think you made a good point about the appropriation and possibly that coming out, but also Representative Lawley talked about some kind of a threshold as to what they've already spent of their money for CTE. And while the bill title may not be able to accommodate that right now, I believe the committee work is the appropriate time to modify that title. So I would be very supportive of, I always have been supportive of all of this, but I'm not as supportive of just adding money to the block grant without any specifics. That's where we've gotten into trouble in the past. And so that would be my comment on the bill. If we're going to move it forward, I think we need to do a little more work on it before I can support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. The motion before us is to introduce the bill. I would think we could add a reporting requirement on the way through the legislature if we wanted to. The bills, I would think, but you would have an argument that we're changing the thing too much. I don't think that argument would prevail, where we're simply trying to find out where the money's going. But if somebody wants to put it in now, now's your opportunity. Take it or leave it. Representative Ed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess the amendments I would like to offer is more of a broader conceptual amendment. that would convert this bill into more of a specific grant that does the same thing rather than changing anything in the block grant. So it would be separate from that. We wouldn't have to mess with it, and we could still make the funds available. It'd be quite a change, but I think we could do that in an interim committee.
So you want to convert it to a specific block grant. That we could do, but you are setting a precedent. If we start doing that on small items like this, you're essentially saying we're going to do away with local control and go to a centralized dictating all the details. If we start going, because this is a pretty small item, you can justify it here, you can justify it in, I don't know, 100 other places. I have a concern about that, but is that something you really want to pursue?
Mr. Chairman, I think that there are probably many kinds of small grants that are available to schools already. I'm not sure if this one thing sets a precedent, but I mean, if that's what we're really trying to do is increase opportunities for CTE, I think the best way to do it is a specific grant. I don't know, I think this would be outside of the block grant.
Okay, so that's,
So-
so you take it outside of the block grant.
Right, I'm not necessarily offering like a siloing solution. I think it'd be just a separate
Okay.
thing.
Does the second bill, those things, are those outside the block grant or are those within it in the second bill?
Mr. Chairman, you have two categorical grants for CTE supplies and equipment outside of the block grant currently. 2112-105 and 2113-337. We'll discuss those in a bit.
Okay, so we do have precedent in this area. We could do that. Or we could say, no, it's good enough the way it is. Representative, what's your preference? Do you want to try to convert it to a block grant, to a specific grant? Credenza.
Thank you for the help committee. I believe in our next bill draft, we might be addressing that. So I don't, because next bill draft is, talks about the consolidation of career technical education grant. So I think that just to add to your concerns of maybe where to put this, maybe we can have that conversation with the next bill.
Okay, committee, do we want to pursue that, or do we want to just introduce this? What's your preference?
Mr. Chairman, I think that would be the right path.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I think that would be the right path to work this into the next bill. Or
You want to lay this bill back temporarily? Or you want to just deal with the issue in the next bill?
Mr. Chairman, I'm withdrawing my potential amendment, I guess.
Okay. Any further discussion?
So it's two different things, and both have independent policy considerations. We have two bills because we have two different programs associated with CTE right now for grants. Those are the next pieces of legislation. This is with regard to effectively what is the minimum funding that is necessary to put together a high-quality CTE program, and recognizing that when we're doing partial ADMs in a small district, the funding through the block grant is insufficient to run a high-quality CTE program. Entirely different concept. Grants for equipment, different program, right? We have to have that, otherwise these small districts will never have the equipment. So equipment grants are essential. But this is really trying to ensure that if you fall below 2 FTEs, that you still have the capacity to have enough funds to have people teaching your CTE program. That's what this one is looking at. So It's two different issues, both have to be addressed. You can't just have a grant program because you don't have any teachers to teach the equipment. This is let's get teachers through the block grant funded sufficiently and supplies resources, right? The ongoing costs, as opposed to the grant for new equipment, which are the other bills. In my view, Mr. Chairman, you have to have both pieces in place, the ongoing expenses through the block grant, which again, you have to choose to spend it that way, but you can't choose to spend it in the right way if it isn't there. This bill puts it there, and then getting a district to choose to spend it is a separate conversation. And then having equipment that they can teach with is grant programs through the next two bills. So just wanted to summarize kind of where we're at.
Make one correction, this is not just small districts. This includes my district, which is the second largest in the state. It's small schools.
Mr. Chairman, I misspoke. My apologies. It's small schools I was getting, smaller school pop numbers was my intent, and I said districts. My apologies.
And anything further? Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of concerns, again, maybe they're not worth dealing with right now, but are we incentivizing people to categorize differently? Because that issue is brought up about the categorization of sometimes employees that maybe don't get categorized as CTE, but maybe they're doing the CTE work. And I do want to make sure this money goes to smaller districts. And I guess is what I'm saying. And but so I have that question, and then I have another question concerning recalibration that maybe Senator Rothfuss can help us with, but because he's done enough of those. But by passing this bill, and if we were to get it passed through the legislature, and then we work through recalibration, would it strengthen the position of recalibration looking at this issue more closely overall? Because that's something I would like to see happen, and recalibration seems to be the place to do it, but, we're not going to all be involved in that. And so I just wonder if it will, passing what's before us right now, strengthen the likelihood that the recalibration would look at CTE money, how it's spent, and whether we should possibly put some conditions on the expenditure.
Let me respond to that one by saying, I think Senator Rothfuss said earlier, and it's, I think, correct, that the recalibration is likely to concentrate on some of the larger dollar items and ignore a relatively small piece like this, just in the nature of trying to get the recalibration done. So there's some value in us dealing with a small issue right now while it's before us and we understand it. So we will probably help the recalibration process.
That's what I'm asking.
Because it will probably not get into this level of detail on an issue like this. I think that's a correct understanding of the recalibration. Chris, if I could.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that's fair. And the other thing is, we typically end up starting with the current model and then building on from the current model and then looking for places we need to change it. So if we have, you look at the small school adjustment, for example, small school adjustment is usually retained, even though we take a look at it for ways to tweak it. We had an alternative funding model for small schools at one point that was proposed, and then we didn't adopt that. We went with what we have right now. So you can imagine if we move this forward and we adjust for a small school for CTE teachers, that'll probably be the baseline in what we do in a recalibration. If we wanted to take the time to do a better job, then we could build off of it, figure out, does it need a categorical grant as some portion of it, which again, we did that with instructional facilitators for a while, and still, no, I think we rolled it back into the model, right? Yeah, we did. So for a while, instructional facilitators were categorically granted outside the model. Then we rolled it back in 4 years ago, something along those lines. So we can do that type of analysis.
If there was a 30 million appropriation, we could say, yeah, recalibration will probably look at it. If it was 300 million, we'd say for sure they were going to look at it. 300,000.
Yeah.
No.
Thank you. I think I'm just, I guess, going on the record saying I would hope the recalibration would look at the whole CTE situation. I mean, this may be drawing some attention to it, but, I would like to see that. I know there's lots of big things to consider in the recalibration, but I'd love to see CT prioritized, so thank you.
Co-Chairman Northrop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to address the reporting of the FTEs and not FTEs, but how the teachers are reported in some of the districts. I know that some of the districts in particular have enough students that they can have 1 or 2 classes of CTE. So maybe they'll do a small engine class and, for example, and then they have another class that they teach with their students, but that's not enough to employ a teacher. And so that teacher then has extra duty where he goes out and he's a band teacher. I'm just thinking, if Matiti was here, I could ask them to address this, but he's a band teacher, and so he was doing band and he was doing CTE at the same time. And so when you look at the numbers, you'll see, oh, well, they're not fully utilizing that teacher, but it's utilized in a different manner than just all CTE. It's their duties are scattered across the district. And that's common in a lot of the districts that are smaller.
Interrupt. We have with us now, I guess it's not representative-elect yet, but from my House district, the to-be representative Lynn. Okay, and so welcome. House members, a new colleague for you. Okay, did we cover your concerns? Because we need to move on.
Yeah, I know. I just want, concerning this comment that Chairman Northrop made, are those categorized in some sort of way, like 1/4 times CTE, however it divides up, or is the reporting not that fine-tuned? Do you know?
Mr. Chairman, I cannot answer that question.
Okay. Mr. Wilmarth?
Mr. Chairman, the Department of Education requires school districts to report on an assignment basis. So a teacher or bus driver, a teacher may be a bus driver as well. So if they have multiple assignments, they're required to report those multiple assignments.
Okay. Anything further? Seeing none, the question is, shall this committee sponsor 25 LSO 0096 as a committee bill in the coming session? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Chairman, on 25 LSO 96, career technical education funding, do sponsor. Senator Beitman? Senator Brennan? Senator Rothfuss? Senator Steinmetz?
No.
Representative Allred?
Aye.
Representative Andrew? Representative Berger?
Aye.
Representative Brown is excused. Representative Clausen is excused. Representative Lawley?
Aye.
Representative Overmuller is excused. Representative Provenza?
Aye.
Co-Chairman Northrop?
Aye.
Chairman Scott?
Aye. What was the count?
I got to do some math. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I've got 10 aye, 1 no, 3 excused.
Okay, so that is approved. The next bill for our consideration is 25 LSO 0098, consolidation of career and technical education grants. This is the grant program, and it's more than a little complicated. LSO, if you would come forward.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Tanya Heitrick, Legislative Service Office. This bill draft is agenda item number 11, 25 LSO 0098, consolidation of career technical education grants under 2112-105 and 2113-337. Recall at your June meeting, you instructed staff to take a look at these two grant programs and present a bill draft that consolidates the two. There are substantial deviations in the grant programs and the amounts and the requirements and the prioritization in the awards. And so rather than making those choices for the committee, which is not appropriate for LSO, we began with the bill draft, or excuse me, the statute 2113-337, which is the Career Technical Education Grants Program that was enacted most recently. This bill draft does repeal the other grant program under 2112-105. That being said, the staff comments contain and outline the deviation. Those are policy choices for you all to make. You can certainly instruct staff to change the amounts or the requirements. This is simply a starting place for purposes of discussion. With that, I will go ahead and walk through the bill draft. The staff comment on the bottom of page 1 and on to page 2 outlines this notion that I just spoke of related to the two different grant programs. Section 1 amends 2113-337, which is the career technical education grants, and subsection A that's contained on page 2, line 19 through page 3, line 16, amends the program to include those expenditures that are contained not only in this program, but also in the CTE demonstration project grant, and modifies existing language to conform to the repeal of 2112-105. Under current law, you cannot receive a grant under both programs. So if you receive a grant under one program, you are prohibited from receiving it from the other program. And so that obviously has been repealed or stricken in this particular draft. And so on page 3, that new language that you see, Romanet I is from the existing grant program under 2113-3837. Romanet 2 is the authorized expenditures under the alternative grant program under 2112-105. Subsection B on page 3, line 18 through page 4, line 3, maintains the grant awards within the CTE grant program under 337. This is an important distinction, $50,000 per year for 2 years, but under 2112-105B, as outlined in the staff comment on page 4, lines 4 through 15, the maximum grant under the other CTE program is $150,000 in the first year and $200,000 in the second year, for a maximum of $350,000 for the 2-year period. Again, these are policy choices to be presented to the committee.
Microphone.
So we would be, the bill is written, the limitation would be 50,000. And what we would, it repeals the 150 or 200,000 that is in the second, on the other grant. Should we reverse that and keep the larger amount and repeal the smaller one to give more flexibility?
Mr. Chairman, I think that is a policy choice for this body to make. But I would encourage you to utilize this particular statute, 2113-337. In my opinion, it's the appropriate place for the grant program. These are the school finance statutes. So you could certainly modify the amounts that are contained in page 3 on lines 18 through 20 to
We could use the
reflect.
larger amounts there instead of the 50,000.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. The entire program, the entire statute created under 2112-105 is repealed on page 9 in section 2, line 5.
Okay. Senator
And an alternative way to do it, so the Romanet 1 paragraph on page 3 in statute currently has a limit of $50,000. That limit's being carried over. The prior language that you see on page 4 in the staff comment was relevant to Romanet 2, the second paragraph on page 3. Instead of just raising the limit to 150 or 200,000, we could put that language effectively in so that it governs paragraph 2, and the 50,000 limit governs paragraph 1 as well, just by changing the paragraph B, which might make sense because the Romanet 2 is developing a program for up to 2 years. That's more comprehensive. The Romanet 1 is, here are supplies, here are single pieces of equipment. So merging the two might be the right way to do it.
We'll hold that and get the rest of the explanation of that.
And Mr. Chairman, to that point, I would encourage the committee to carefully review Romanets 1 and 2. I think there is some duplication. It's possible those could be combined, and it may create ambiguity for the agency in administering the program because they are so closely aligned in purpose. Moving on, page 4, line 20. This just strikes supplies, materials, and equipment, sort of hearkening back to my prior comment, which is it's larger than just supplies, materials, and equipment. It's a conforming amendment. I would also draw the committee's attention to page 4, line 26 through page 5, line 15. This is another staff comment which outlines additional requirements associated with the CTE Education Demonstration Project Grant, which is the statute that's being repealed. In the event that these are important components to the committee, it's a policy choice to insert those in this particular statute. Page 5, lines 19 through 28, this contains additional requirements included within the CTE grant program. And there's these, I would note also, several of the provisions, all of the provisions in 21-13-337 are included in this bill draft for context. As you all know, typically that's not what LSO does, but because this is such a robust discussion to make policy choices, we thought it was important. Of course, when the bill draft is numbered, those provisions that are not amended will be removed from the bill. The staff note on the bottom of page 5 onto page 6 through line 20 outlines components of the demonstration project grant that also deviate from the CTE equipment grant program. And page 6, line 23 through page 7, line 12 contains subsection C, which specifies the notification requirements in awarding or denying application and maintains the requirement that the district expend those funds generated under the Education Resource Block Grant model before applying for a grant under this section. I would note this is not a requirement of 21-12-105. And then moving on, page 7, line 5, this is simply a cleanup amendment. When there was an amendment, when this bill began, there were 2 preferences within it for award. One of the preferences was removed and is now a requirement of receiving the grant. And so further is inaccurate. It's an error. It needs to be stricken. The only priority is that if you have not received a grant in the immediately preceding 5 school years. And I would note again, that is not a component of 21-12-105. And that's outlined in the staff comment on the bottom of page 6 and on to page 7. Subsection D, lines 12 through 15, this authorizes the Department of Education, or requires them rather, to report on the expenditure of these amounts. Again, this is not being modified, but is included for context and will be eliminated in the final bill draft. One additional requirement under the demonstration project grant is that they have to, that the recipient needs to provide an evaluation of the program results in consultation with post-secondary in the industry. This is not a requirement under the CTE grants program. No amendment to subsection E on page 8, lines 32 and 33. This requires the Department of Education to promulgate rules. Again, no amendment on page 9, lines 1 through 3, defines career technical education as identified under the Education Resource Block Grant Model. On page 9, line 5, this repeals 21-12-105, which is the project demonstration grant program. Section 3 on page 9, lines 7 through 12, directs the Department of Education to include a single budget request within their upcoming budget for the CTE grant program, essentially giving them a nod that it is the expectation that these two programs will be consolidated. And I would note the effective date on page 9 created in section 4 on line 14 is July 1st of 2026. And in conversations within LSO, those funds have already been awarded to the department for those two grant programs. They made their budget request and those funds would have become effective July 1st of 2024. Both of those grant programs are 2-year programs. It could be that school districts are relying on that for the second year of their program. So it makes practical sense to push out the implementation and consolidation an additional year. And that's noted on the bottom of page 9 in the staff comments on lines 15 through 29. And there's no text on page 10, it's simply asterisks.
Any questions? No.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just real briefly, the section 2 that was repealed, I know you went over it real quick, but could you walk me through that again? I pulled it up and it seems substantial, so.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, Representative, the distinctions between the programs are outlined in the staff comment. We can certainly, not the staff comments, any decision point that deviated additional requirements, amounts, the award preferences, those are noted in each of the staff comments. That was the intent, is to draw the committee's attention to the differences between the program, but we can certainly give the committee a copy of that statute in its entirety.
I have it pulled up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. That answers my question.
Much. Department of Education. Okay, Department of Education, you're on. I understand you're going to have to administer this thing. We'd like to hear what you think of what we're doing to you if we pass this.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for this time. My name is Wanda Maloney with the Department of Education. I also joined with a colleague that is also overseeing the career and technical education grants.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. My name is Jennifer Lehif, College and Career Readiness Supervisor at the department.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, as we look at this bill, you recall when we came to you in June, the request was from the superintendent that we consolidate the two grants, the demonstration grant and the equipment grant. And the request was because of the number of participants and people in the district that were confused between the two grants. And we're really looking for efficiency. We want to continue to serve the districts and make sure that they have the money available. But there were really just a lot of confusions and questions around the different types. And we are trying to streamline and ensure that all districts have access and understand all the components needed to be able to get these supplies or these funds. One last comment that I would just make, Mr. Chairman, was that we have been communicating with the Career and Technical Education Organization and are aware that they will be bringing some changes forward to you, and we would ask that you would highly regard those suggestions that they bring forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 3, where we have the new language, Romanet I and Romanet II, is that going to be a problem for you guys to admit? Is that confusing, or do we need a and or there, or just combine them into one paragraph? Assuming we put all the money into one pot and like the 350, and then just make it for whether you need it for supplies, materials, or planning and development, that money is available and you guys will dish out the grants as you see fit. Did that make more sense, or is it constructed the way you would like it now?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Beitman. I do think that we could work with it either way. If it was consolidated and streamlined, we would be able to support that just as well.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Northrop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along that same line, on page 3, Romanets I and II, if we were to take and do as the Senator Rothfuss had suggested and used I to be a $50,000 grant, and then II to be the bigger of the two, which was the 150 up to 200, does that cause consternation or problems with you guys?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Northrop, I think what we can do is just speak to some of the funds that we have allocated for each of these, if that's helpful, to kind of share what we've already used. When we look at the legislative grants, we do recognize that districts are buying, the equipment grants are buying big pieces of equipment for that. So those are high dollar items. When we look at the demonstration grant, we are getting requests over the $100,000 for those demonstration grants, knowing that they are wanting to set up either animal science, career readiness, auto updates, a variety of things. Does that answer your question?
Okay, now I don't understand. Are you telling us that we ought to have a single size limitation on the grants, and it ought to be the larger one? Is that what you're telling us?
Mr. Chairman, I'm just providing the information just to let you know that because the grants were set up the way they were, it allowed for different amounts to come forward. So when you have a limit on 50,000 per year, you're obviously going to get requests for that. When you have a larger amount, you're going to have districts looking for setting up bigger programs that match that amount. I'm just trying to share with you that districts are coming to us with requests of both amounts.
Representative Northrop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So for clarity, you're saying that you're either seeing $50,000 grants or $150,000 grants?
Correct, Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Career and technical people, you want to come up front and tell us, you've got some suggestions for improving this? introduce yourselves again for the record and proceed.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for having us. Jessie Defoe with Wyoming Association for Career and Technical Education.
Mr. Chairman, Rob Hill with the Wyoming Association of Career and Technical Education.
And so we're here to speak in, again, support of this piece of legislation as well and what it would accomplish for school districts across the state. We look to this too, just to streamline the process, to create consistency and efficiencies for the school districts, to have one time when they're applying for the grants, when they would be receiving the grants, putting those all together in one format, we think would be really beneficial for school districts. And so we're excited about that. And this does, again, these funds, they provide the necessary support to local programs who are needing it. As you heard previously, the grants are being applied for those full amounts. So we would like to talk about a recommendation for this that we've been visiting with folks with and happy to provide, any additional information that might be helpful. But in this current piece of legislation, it talks about a 5-year rolling average. We would like to propose potentially even a 2-year rolling average and look back on the data and almost a reset of sorts so that we could make sure that as we look back at this data, because that is the big question, right? Can we look back and see where it's at? The school districts know from this point going forward, this is what we're looking at, and these are the years that would be referenced in providing the funds.
Mr. Chairman, in regards to the look back, if we were to move forward and do a 5-year look back, and we just don't have enough districts that would qualify going back 5 years. But if we were to provide a 2-year rolling average, it would give us a reset of sorts. Yes.
I'm confused. Rolling average of what?
The expenditures on the 29% point. So, Mr. Chairman, the 5 years, if a district were to miss one of those years as it is now, they wouldn't qualify. So we have a significant amount of funds here that wouldn't be available. So our solution is to try and address accountability, to make sure the money is being expended as intended, but also to provide districts some flexibility for larger purchases. And then for those districts that are expending that 29%, some additional grant money would be available.
Okay, so that's one modification. Is that the principal one?
Yes, sir.
Okay. How do you feel about the various staff comments that we've gotten in this bill that pointing out that we're repealing a bunch of those?
Mr. Chairman, as a whole, I think this works great for efficiency, streamlining. I would maybe call your attention to the $50,000 max. With inflation, as Co-Chairman Northrup spoke to, materials and equipment have seen historic rises in the last 5 to 7 years. So that threshold is maybe a little low.
Could we use a single larger threshold for both of the two provisions? Or would we be better off moving the 50,000 to 100,000 and then have the 150 as it is now?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's correct. They kind of serve two different purposes. One is really for those big material equipment purchases, and the other one can have a lot of other components to it. So I would tend to agree with what you stated there.
Okay. Committee, any questions? Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rob, I just want to make sure I understood your last answer. Do you feel that it's adequate to bring up the amount that was originally for what's in Romanet 1 on page 3 versus, lines 7 through 9, and have its original amounts attached to that, and then the other amounts that are already in here attached to Romanet 2, the different categories? Is that you're saying that you feel like that is the best way for the department to proceed with the two different
Mr. Chairman and Representative Lawley, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, maybe one other possible thought on the topic too is if a district wanted to do like large purchases and put funds in like in a reserve fund over a 5-year average, maybe that would provide them some flexibility, particularly smaller districts. So one more thought to add to this.
Okay. On the rolling average, where in the bill draft would you make that amendment?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, we have proposed language on that if you would like.
Yes, we would like.
So, Mr. Chairman, beginning on page 6, subsection C, I believe line 23, I can walk you through the proposal. Not later than August 15th of the applicable school year and following review of applications submitted under this section, the department shall notify applicant districts of its grant awards and shall provide each applicant district a written statement of the reasons for approving or denying the application. No award shall be given to a district unless it has expended or will expend with the award of the grant requested under this section the entire amount generated under WS 21-13-309 for supplies, materials, and equipment for career and technical education programs utilizing expenditure data from 2025 State of Wyoming 25 LSO-09 Committee formal draft 1.07. So on line 1, from the immediately preceding, we would strike 5 and add 2 school years on a rolling average, returning to the text from the date of application and amounts from the special reserve fund created under the same fund, under the same reference for supplies, materials, and equipment for career and technical education programs. We would add the 2-year rolling average from that fund for supplies, materials, and equipment for career and technical education programs shall begin with the awards for the 2027-28 school year using the most recent 2 years of data. And then following the text all the way to line 12 as it is.
I'm not sure the second part would be needed. I think the effective date change might cover that. Also,
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think you're right. And I'm also not tracking that rolling average. I think the bill, how it is currently written, it looks at the past 5 years of allocations and looks at the past 5 years of expenditures. It's not necessarily an average per se. It's just how much have you been awarded through the block grant and how much have you expended through your general fund and the special reserve fund.
if we were to change the 5-2 and you had, say, a district that had spent on average the required amount, but 2/3 of the expenditure was in one year and 1/3 in the other year, would the low year knock them out, or would the average count?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think it really matters because you're just looking at total expenditures.
You're just looking at the total expenditures over the
Past 2 years, you know.
So we don't need the rolling average language.
Perhaps there's further reasoning on average, but if you're provided 20,000 over a 2-year period and you expend, I mean, on average, you could expend 10,000 per year. I'm not sure what the impetus of the average is.
Mr. Chairman, we were looking at that from the context of if a district spent 150% in one year and 50% in another, that they had still kind of equaled out the expenditure, and it gave them a little bit of flexibility.
And that's what we're trying to figure out. Do we need to treat it that way? Do we need extra language or not?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know that mathematically it matters. We can certainly put in an average of the amount awarded, but the amount awarded that is averaged is going to be essentially the same as, awarded in total.
Let's hold that one in advance for a minute. Your other point was, is there a specific amendment you had in mind?
Move it, Mr. Chairman, moving the 5-year to 2-year in regards to that?
Yeah, but you had another point beyond that, did you not?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, the reserve fund, providing some flexibility if they wanted to save up for a bigger purchase, and then we look at it in sum over a certain amount of years.
Okay, so you want to accommodate a reserve fund, and you don't have specific language on that.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct.
Okay. Okay. Committee. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Understand the one, anybody else here present want to testify? Anybody else? Anybody else? Going once, going twice? I don't see any further comments on this. Okay. Committee, this is a complicated bill. I think the testimony is that the department thinks it will, consolidating these and getting rid of some of the features will make for a much better program. The delayed effective date handles is I think necessary, staff comment. I think there's considerable virtue in the suggestions from the Career and Technical Association people, but one of them is not, it's not clear whether we just change the 5 to 2 or we need to add some language about averaging it. It's not at all clear to me that the reserve, I think it is clear that the reserve fund issue may not be adequately handled. So we've got a couple of issues there. I think by and large, looking at what they were repealing, and the language is reproduced here, we need to pay attention to the first one on page 4. That needs to be incorporated. I think we're probably better off without incorporating the second one, and the partnership language on page 6 we need to take a look at. My suggestion is, what I'd like to do is get a member or two of the committee to work with the Career and Technical Association people, the department, and the LSO to get specific amendments that we can deal with at the next session, as opposed to trying to do it on the fly here. I think we'd mess it up. Because, okay, we've got a volunteer. Anybody else want to volunteer to join? Representative Lawley and Representative Northrup. If you two can work with the LSO staff to see which of the staff comments we ought to pick up to incorporate the recommendations from the Career and Technical Association people, so we have an amendment that does what we think it does, and get that prepared for next time. I think that would be the most expeditious way to deal with this. Is that acceptable to the rest of the committee? Okay, we'll deal with that. You two are the work with Tanya. Matt, who do they work with? Okay, you and the Career and Technical people, and bring the State Department in. Okay, with that, we'll carry this over to next time for the preparation of a specific amendment that will deal with those issues. Okay, that, the next item on the agenda then is the overview of Wyoming Works and Wyoming Tomorrow. We're going to take a brief break at this point and then come back to that, okay? Break till 10:30. Or 10-minute break, it'll be a little 10-minute break.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Yeah, no, we'll get something put together. There's too many.
There's too many. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the overview of Wyoming Works in Wyoming Tomorrow. Tanya, Ashley, LSO, proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Ashley Phillips, Legislative Editor, Legislative Service Office. At your June 12th and 13th meeting, the committee requested information on the Wyoming Works program and the Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship Program, specifically the differences between the two programs. So the memo that was in your packet summarizes both of those statutes and outlines some of those differences. So I won't go through all of that, but I will highlight some of the key points and the key differences between the two programs. One of the biggest ones is the Wyoming Works program must be utilized for programs approved by the Wyoming Community College Commission, while the Wyoming's Tomorrow program, any program can qualify for that scholarship, any student in any program. The critical needs programs offered by the University of Wyoming and the community colleges are given preference in the award of those scholarships, but any student, any program can receive it. Another key difference is the scholarship amount. The Wyoming Works program has a $10,080 maximum, which is a maximum of $1,680 per semester. That amount is tied to the Wyoming Honors Scholarship. There is also a second level of that that is aligned with the Provisional Hathaway Scholarship, and the Community College Commission has not categorized any, or has categorized every program on their list as meeting a critical workforce need. So every student can receive up to $1,680 for up to 6 academic terms or 6 years. The Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship has a $7,200 maximum at $1,800 per semester for up to 4 academic terms or 2 years. The amount for the Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship is dependent on the number of credit hours a student is enrolled in. So they receive, sorry, I had that amount. They receive a set dollar amount for each credit hour, up to $150 per credit hour, up to $1,800. So it does not matter if a student is enrolled in more than 12 credit hours, they are capped at that $1,800. The annual caps for the Works program is $2 million on student awards. There is no cap on its programmatic awards, and the Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship is limited to expenditures of 5% of the endowment fund in that account. Another key difference would be that the Wyoming Works program has a programmatic grants program. So programs also approved by the Community College Commission, colleges can receive grants for the programs itself, which must be matched by a ratio of 2 to 1. So for every $2 of state funding, the community college must have $1 matched by the private sector non-state funds. Wyoming's Tomorrow is limited to student programming. The requirements for each program are pretty similar. Both require the student to be a US citizen or eligible non-citizen. They must be a Wyoming resident. The Wyoming's Tomorrow has an additional requirement on that where they must be a resident of Wyoming 1 year preceding or a total of 3 years prior to their application. Both programs require that they've completed the federal application for financial student aid, and then they both require that the student does not owe a federal refund and is not receiving the Hathaway Scholarship. Some of the differences in the requirement include, for Wyoming Works, the student must be registered for the selective service if they are required to be registered for selective service. They cannot be in default of a federal loan. And then for Wyoming's Tomorrow, the scholarship does have a minimum age of 24 years, and they cannot be incarcerated, and they must register with the Department of Workforce Services for workforce training in order to receive this scholarship. A high school diploma for Wyoming Works is not required, and if it is required for the academic program a student is enrolled in, the community college is required to assist in helping them receive either a high school diploma or the equivalent. The Wyoming's Tomorrow has specific requirements for student academic progress, including completing 2/3 of the attempted credit hours, a 2.0 cumulative GPA, and continuous enrollment. For Wyoming Works programmatic grants, consortiums between the colleges are given preference. There has been $3 million awarded to date for programmatic grants and $2.2 million awarded for student grants. Of that, $411,300 remains in the student grant account. That program requires that the legislature reappropriate funds in order to continue dispersing those grants. For Wyoming's Tomorrow, there is a $50 million endowment minimum in that account, which the legislature appropriated last budget session. And so that is fully funded, and the community colleges and the University of Wyoming can start awarding those scholarships next school year. That scholarship is funded through the endowment account, so funds do not need to be reappropriated every year. And then one more thing to note is the legislature created what has been dubbed the Kickstart Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship Program, which provided for scholarships to students meeting the same requirements under Wyoming's Tomorrow for the current school year 24-25. And I'll stand for any questions.
Committee, any questions? Okay, I'm going to ask several then. The things mesh so that when the Kickstart expires, the Wyoming's Tomorrow will kick in directly. Is the timing working there?
So, Mr. Chairman, there is no end to that Kickstart program. It is just an additional scholarship program.
But it's appropriated in the current biennium, is it not?
That is correct.
And when the biennium expires, the Wyoming's Tomorrow will kick in, right?
Mr. Chairman, so it technically has already kicked in. The community colleges have set up the rules. The reason why they can't start that program for this current school year is because that budget was not appropriated until this year. So it will start the next school year where applications will be coming in for the program and they can start awarding it.
For the school year starting in fall of '25, the Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship will be available, right?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Will the Kickstart thing still be available then, or will that be over at that point?
Mr. Chairman, the appropriation is for the biennium, so I think there could potentially be a duplication of funding available, one from the investment income on the Wyoming Tomorrow's account, and then two from the standalone appropriation within the budget bill. The intent was to ensure that the full year of that $50 million endowment was available for distribution through applications, but depending on when the state treasurer realizes that investment income through dividends and interest in capital gains, the timing of that probably was not going to happen this first fiscal year. The second fiscal year, likely, but it's unknown how much that investment income will be. So there is a little bit of duplication, just not sure how much money will be available for that first year.
Money may not have been in the account long enough.
Mr. Chairman, the distribution of those funds are dependent upon when the state treasurer distributes it to the income account or the expenditure account, whatever, I can't recall what it's called. But that should occur at the end of fiscal year 2025. So in theory, they could utilize some of those investment earnings in academic year 2025-26.
Fiscal year 25 starts when?
Mr. Chairman, it started July 1 of 2024.
Okay, so we're in that now. Okay. So we aren't really looking at a big duplication.
Mr. Chairman, it may be one academic year.
Yeah, okay. Mr. Schwank, is that? Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. My name is Michael Swank. I'm the Deputy Director and Chief Financial Officer for the Wyoming Community College Commission. The commission administers both of these programs, so I'll be a phone a friend, I guess. With the Wyoming's Tomorrow Scholarship, the Kickstart, which is called the Higher Education Scholarship in the budget bill, the supplemental budget bill last year, and the biennial bill this year, with the overlap, I guess I wouldn't call it a duplication. There's actually a provision in the budget bill this year that specifies no student can qualify for both the Wyoming's Tomorrow and the Kickstart. The issue, as Mr. Wilmarth noted, is that the regular Wyoming's Tomorrow endowment was just fulfilled July 1 of this year. Therefore, it doesn't have expenditures kicking to the expenditure account from which the college scholarships come from. So in our rules, we did implement rules shortly after the 22 session when the original statutory authority was passed. And what we will do is we will provide an allocation based on estimated investment income next spring, and then that will be allocated to the colleges and University of Wyoming, and then we will refine that before the 25 fall semester to get the regular Wyoming's Tomorrow started. The current Kickstart has been active last academic year and this academic year, but we will transition over to only the regular Wyoming's Tomorrow next academic year. There will be no overlap in terms of students, but one program will be closing and the other one will be opening.
Going to work without having a sudden blip or anything.
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Committee, is that? I would comment on one item in the presentation. The original concept in Wyoming's Tomorrow was for a much larger endowment. I think the figure of 200 million was mentioned. The 50 million is merely the minimum, and that was put in to ensure that we had a program that was large enough to justify the administrative costs. It was generating enough money so that we would have that. So it's not, I would not say it's the program is fully funded when it meets the minimum. The concept was and continues to be that we will gradually grow the Wyoming's Tomorrow account and have a much larger program, because frankly, you're talking about 2.5 million. I don't think that's going to be enough scholarships to come anywhere near to meeting the demand. So I would caution against looking at that 50 million as a minimum figure. Senator Office, you were involved in that. Am I getting that one right?
Yeah, and I'm not sure whether 200 million is the amount that we calculated, but that does sound like the ballpark amount of what we saw as the potential need. And I was going to ask as a follow-up what we're predicting right now as an annual desired draw based on applicants, and that'll help us to then understand what we would need in the endowment to be able to meet that. Do we have a sense of that now?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, after 1 year of the Kickstart, I don't know that we have a great idea. So far, the first academic year of Kickstart, we served roughly 450 total students, individual students. Some of those started in fall of 24 or 23, and some of them started in spring 24 and summer. But in terms of the total draw, we did spend all but $100,000 of the original Kickstart amount of $1.25 million. I will say that generally the demand has been about as estimated from the colleges. The higher demand than it was anticipated comes from UW. I believe they were about 50% higher than what they originally expected, because one of the things that I did want to note is one of the big differences between Wyoming Works and Kickstart is that Kickstart starts at age 24. So students can be age high school graduate or however they obtain their credentials through 24 or higher, whereas Kickstart only starts when a student is 24 years of age. So there is a slight discrepancy on when they can access different scholarships for those different purposes.
Quick follow-up. So honestly, it looks like right now, we're probably okay in the near future in terms of the revenue we'll be generating versus the current demand, but as the program is better understood, better marketed, we'll probably fall short, or are we needing to put money in the near future to get the 50 million up to what demand will need?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I don't know that I can specify well, but right now I believe we're on a balance, meaning the demand is meeting what the revenue is. Right now, we are actually going through currently this week and before the 13th of September, the fall 24 certifications from the colleges and university. We haven't gone through them fully yet, but we will know more about what increased potential demand there was this academic year as opposed to last, and then that'll be informed. We will inform that to the legislature going forward.
And as I recall, the way we structured it was if the number of applicants exceeds the number of dollars available, it would be a first come, first served with priority to those that already have begun the scholarship so they continue through the end. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, that is correct. Statute prescribes, I believe, 3 or 4 different priorities. First is those that have already been awarded. Second, I believe, are students in high priority programs, and I know that was a particular question this committee had. So far, for both Wyoming Works and Wyoming's Tomorrow, we have not had to do those priorities. The funding has been sufficient for both sides. So that type of prioritization has never had to occur. And then there's a couple other ones that step back depending on what appropriations or funding is available.
Let me ask a further question then. On the Wyoming Tomorrow, suppose you have an individual who is, say, been working as a laborer and decides that they could take a course at a community college, say, to learn how to drive large over-the-road trucks, and it's a less than 1 semester course, and you get a certificate at the end. Wyoming's Tomorrow will accommodate that student, will it not?
Okay, Mr. Chairman, you are correct. So one of the things about Wyoming's Tomorrow, and I appreciate this question, is that Wyoming's Tomorrow does incorporate Wyoming Works programs underneath it. So Wyoming's Tomorrow can support programs that are both credit and non-credit. So someone can utilize Wyoming's Tomorrow or Wyoming Works for that.
Either program they could use for that purpose.
Correct.
Now, different on the scenario, suppose somebody's been say a CNA and decides they want to become a registered nurse, having had some experience in that, and they're coming in as a bit of an older student. Will both programs accommodate that? That's a two-year program in most of our community colleges. I think it's all of them, isn't it now? Have a RN program.
Yes, sir.
So that could be accommodated for an older student with both these programs, or either or both?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that is accurate to the extent that any program that utilizes Wyoming Works funding, or pardon me, any student that wants to utilize Wyoming Works funding has to be in a Wyoming Works approved program. That's a slight difference between all the other college programs or university programs, but each Wyoming Works program has to be approved by the commission specifically for Wyoming Works dollars. So therefore, if the nursing program is under a Wyoming Works approval, then yes, they could utilize that.
Wyoming Tomorrow could definitely use that.
Correct.
That funding. So this is, the Wyoming's Tomorrow is really something that's available for a wide range of older students learning a trade, which can be either something that you can get with a two-year program or something you can get with a certificate program.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. Wyoming's Tomorrow is intended for older students, working adults, also students that are commonly place-bound, meaning they can't necessarily go to a university town for a higher degree or something like that. So skill development, workforce development.
Committee, any other questions on this issue? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. Very informative memo, appreciate it.
And Mr. Chairman,
You want to add something?
if I may, I just wanted to extend the regrets of Commission Executive Director Dr. Ben Moritz. He had a personal emergency he had to attend to, but he would also have been here and would have appreciated your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Coming and helping us educate, because these are important programs for our population. Okay, the next item, any public comment on this whole career and technical education block we've dealt with? We've dealt with the committee action already. Any further public comment in the career and technical education area? Okay, seeing none, we'll now go to the Wyoming Innovative Partnership. Who's going to present on that? Okay. Introduce yourselves and proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, members of the committee. I'm Lauren Shainfeld. I am the Wyoming Innovation Partnership Executive Director. Thank you for having me back today. I had the opportunity to visit with you guys at your last meeting as well. I brought some experts with me today. You guys saw that you had your Phase 2 report, which also included the return on investment report. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to the experts at the University of Wyoming Center for Business and Economic Analysis to walk through their methodology of the return on investment. You also have a presentation in front of you, and I'm going to get it up on the screens as well. So go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Dave Odland. I'm a professor of economics at the University of Wyoming, and I also direct the Center for Business and Economic Analysis at the University of Wyoming. So let me just give you a little bit of a background on our center. We started in 2019, started small. The goal was to work with stakeholders across the state of Wyoming on economic problems and economic development issues. We grew quickly. We've done over 60 projects for the state of Wyoming since 2019. We have 8 PhD level researchers in economics, and we fund about 6 graduate students. So one of our projects was to come up with a return on investment estimate for the Wyoming Innovation Partnership. So that's what I'm going to talk about. I'll just go a little bit through the methodology of how we did this. It was a challenging project. and then I'll talk a little bit about the numbers and give a little context to them. So in terms of methodology, I worked with Anders von Sant, who's next to me. He'll speak in a minute, and 2 PhD students assisted us. And so the first thing we did is we just met with all the program directors of WIP and learned about their programs, collected information, and then we took that back and started to work on generating return on investment estimates. And so we did this using standard economic impact methodology, which is essentially just a cost-benefit analysis. And so the costs here for this program were pretty straightforward. We looked at phase 1 and phase 2 funds allocated for WIP. It was about $44 million that we ended up looking at for the costs of the program. And then we had to figure out how to estimate the benefits to the state of Wyoming. That's more challenging. And so there's lots of different ways to measure these benefits. I mentioned we use economic impact methodologies, so we used a program called IMPLAN, and our assessment of the benefit numbers. There's a number of different ways to think about the benefits, and we looked at a number of different things. One is just how many jobs were created from WIP programs, how much tax revenue, both state and local, were generated. The measure we ended up settling on, which is fairly common in the literature, is called value added. And so that's the number that we use for our basic return on investment. And for value added, I think the easiest way to think about it is this is the contribution to Wyoming's gross state product. So that's the number. It's a more comprehensive, broad number. So I should also say, in terms of methodology, I think we were fairly conservative in our estimates. And by this, I mean, there are a number of benefits that I think WIP programs have that are qualitative that would be really hard to put a number on. And we didn't attempt to do that. So there's just, we chose the benefits that we felt comfortable trying to quantify. And we list in that, in the slides you have there, a number of the different qualitative benefits we think WIP may have that we didn't try to value. So examples of benefits that would add to Wyoming's gross state product would be things like jobs that students can get. So we only looked at the premium in the salaries that they would receive by getting this training through a WIP program. We looked at hiring of staff and instructors that may be brought in to deliver these programs. We looked at the purchase of equipment that the programs may need, but we were very careful to only look at ones that would benefit the state of Wyoming. So if a piece of equipment were purchased outside of Wyoming, we would consider that a leakage and not count that. So I won't go into all the details. I'll let Anders do a little bit more, but basically we think of it as a conservative estimate. In terms of the numbers, I think you have the numbers in front of you. I'll just focus on the actual return on investment number. The other thing I didn't mention is we looked, it takes a while for these benefits to be realized for these programs, right? Because you got to bring students in, you got to start the programs, and then you have to graduate them. So we looked at both 3-year and 5-year horizons. And so for the 5-year horizon, looking 5 years out, and so some of these are estimates because not all these benefits have been realized yet. Our estimate was a return on investment for WIP of 690%. That sounds really large. But to give this a little context, that's a 5-year horizon. So if you annualize this and look at just like 1 year, it's about a 60% return on investment. Another way to think about that is if you just think of an economic multiplier that are sometimes talked about in this area, in this literature, it's a multiplier of about 1.6. So we scanned the literature, which is pretty sparse in terms of research done on the return on investment of public spending, public expenditures or programs. And this number seems to be right in line with those. For example, there was a national study done on the return on investment of transportation infrastructure spending. and their multiplier was 1.8. Ours is around 1.6. So we think it's a plausible number. So I'll stop there, and I'll turn it over to Anders, who's going to give you a little bit more on the details of our methodology. Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Anders Van Sant. There we go. My name is Anders Van Sant, and I'm a professor in the Department of Agricultural and Applied Economics at the University of Wyoming, as well as a state extension specialist in community and economic development. And every once in a while, Dave brings me to these projects when they fit my skill set, and they're very large projects that he needs some help with. So I was happy to take on this challenge, and I'm just going to talk about some of the methods that we went through to come up with these numbers, and then give you just a quick narrative of the 9 program areas to kind of put those into perspective and talk about some of the challenges we might have incurred just to get in a sense of this conservative approach that we took for this. So some of the common program benefits for these was things like tuition. We brought in new students from outside the state, and that is a direct cash injection into our state economy rather than just transferring to a different school within the state that might have your program that you're interested in. Other ones were employments. Obviously, the goal of these were to create jobs, and we believe they did. And then employment compensation, which is important to distinguish from employment, because sometimes you might have someone continuing to work within their same job, but these new programs gave them skills to increase their productivity and potentially increase their wages. For example, a CNA. Or echocardiography. So common program costs, equipment was a large one. For example, power line tech, you need equipment. A lot of the healthcare stuff, a lot of the VR stuff was purchased outside the state. And so lots of times the equipment, because we don't have much manufacturing here, the equipment was purchased outside the state, and that's a large leakage. Salaries and benefits was another common program cost. Marketing, program development, sort of things you would expect to see from these educational expenses. When we look at the economic impacts, as Dave alluded to, or Dr. Odland, there's tax revenue, employment, or value added. And I believe that because of the economic growth strategy that we have in Wyoming, which is to keep that money within communities to trickle through the economy and allow people to pursue their economic opportunities rather than generating tax revenue, which then gets spent out from the government. I think to focus on value added is the right measurement here rather than tax revenue. If you're thinking purely business, it makes sense to compare revenue in to cost out, but that's not our economic growth strategy. So I would encourage the focus on the value added, although we do present tax revenue, employment, and value added figures within the report. Talk a little bit more about InPlan and the methods behind that. Rather than just telling you it's a software that we used, I can talk a little bit more about why we trust this software and the rigor that goes into this software. It uses something called a social accounting matrix, which we call SAM because it's a little more friendly and easier to say. And this social accounting matrix includes 540 industries, or I think over that actually. So it breaks down the economy into these small segments. It also includes multiple household income groups. It includes the governments, transfers, imports, exports, and all that is across the top of this large matrix and along down the side of this matrix. And all the cells within show how those sectors or economic entities are related to one another. So what we do is we put $1 in and we watch it trickle through the economy and see what bins that money ends up in to try to get a sense of what industries are related to what households, et cetera, to get a measure of all of this. And we compare that economic impact to this, I guess the rainy day fund, the 5% return for the 3-year and the 5-year horizons for 5% return. And so there's multiple economic impacts we can think about. There's the direct impact that occurs. It's just the expenditures that we spend through these programs. There's the indirect impacts that's caused as a secondary effect when we make purchases. Those businesses now have to go out and buy more inputs. And then there's this induced effect, this tertiary effect that's caused by households having increased income and spending that income within our economy. And so these are the 3 different effects that we measure and are represented here in our ROI. I'm going to give a short narrative on each of the program areas, the 9 big ones. But before I do so, there's a couple things that we don't capture in here and kind of illustrates our conservative approach. The first is that we don't capture complementarities between these programs. For example, healthcare and VR both, or virtual reality, both deal with productivity within the healthcare sector. And they could have complementarities that lead to the sum of their benefits being greater than the sum of the costs. And we also do not account for complementarities within programs. So if a particular institution within the state receives money for a program, that might free up money for something else that they can do that they had line item for something. So we don't take those into account, and it would take a lot of time and extra effort to account for all those. But some of these short narratives, energy had some of the biggest returns. That's no surprise. It's a huge industry in the state, and the programs here targeted bottlenecks within the state. For example, Powerline Tech. And so we see large returns both in taxes and value added here. Entrepreneurship was slightly smaller returns, and this is simply because when you invest in entrepreneurships, these entrepreneurs are usually starting out small. They many times rely on family labor, and they rely heavily on proprietor labor as they're starting out. So it'll take time to really see the benefits here, although we did see a positive return on value added. Digital infrastructure, a large share of these purchases were from out of state for equipment. Makes sense. Digital infrastructure, we don't make a lot of that here in our manufacturing. And but it's clear through the positive value added return that it's important as a support role for many other industries within the states. And it'll just take time to really see the impact of these as they're primarily a support industry. To give you an example of one of the challenges we had, the School of Computing, they received money from sources other than WIP. And so when we were looking at the grant dollars they received, we weren't comfortable in attributing all those grant dollars to WIP. So we did not include them as our benefits. But it's feasible to assume that at least some of those grant dollars were created by WIP because those new faculty members were able to apply for grants, et cetera. But if we're not able to directly draw that line up the chain to the funding source, then we did not include it in our analysis. Tourism, another big industry. These programs are very effective at leveraging the size and the strength of our tourism industry. A good example I like to bring up is the CWC, the Central Wyoming College Trail Building Program, that bought all their equipment in state. That is huge because that is no longer leakage. And it's a novel program. It takes advantage of our landscape, our natural resources, and the only other 2 programs like that in the country are in Arkansas and North Carolina, not really our neighborhood. So we're able to attract a lot of new students to the state that then continue to live in the state after graduation. And so this was a very exciting program that shows how we can attract new students and retain our youth by having and leveraging these sorts of programs. Healthcare effectively addressed labor shortages that had the highest relative labor return just because of the bottlenecks in the industries and the way those programs were built out. And the programs leads certainly did their homework there. Advanced manufacturing was one of 2 of the program areas that had a negative overall return on investment. This is largely because manufacturing is a small industry in the States. And so if you put dollars into small industry, you're probably gonna get small dollars out. However, I was pretty disappointed when I saw these results because I was really encouraged by what's going on in the advanced manufacturing programs, in bringing in the industry partners and building out manufacturing. I think investments now in these value-added industries like manufacturing will lead to larger value addeds in the future because we won't be buying as many of those, as much equipment from outside the state, and we will decrease our leakages over time. So I think it's important to look how manufacturing fits into our overall state economy and the benefits it gives other industries. Agriculture was the other program area that had a negative return on investment overall. Again, this is a large and culturally important industry in the state, but primarily these programs focused on research, and it's just going to take time for these research projects to mean something tangible for farmers and ranchers across the state. For example, ranching management is a new program funded by WIP, and it's in my department. However, it takes 4 years to get a degree in my department, and then we only went out 5 years. So you're not going to see huge returns there. Workforce development, another area where you're increasing productivity, leading to large value added. I think about 30% of the dollars here were spent on commercial driver's license drivers. And so, again, that increases our overall capacity in the state and our ability to retain more value added in the future. Virtual reality was probably the most difficult one to assess because nearly all of the purchases were out of state. We don't make VR headsets in Wyoming. But there is a lot of crossover between VR and all the other sectors. They had mini grants go out to healthcare, to tourism, to mining, to keep workers safer on the job. And so the productivity gains here led to an overall positive value added ROI. I actually had to go to the conference and talk to vendors and program leads and do a bunch of homework on that because I didn't know much about it. But it's a fun project to work on, very complex, but hopefully that provides you with some clarity, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a really hard-hitting question, but I continue to see Governor Gordon in here doing stuff that I wish I was doing in my job. So I'm just wondering when I will be invited to climb poles and be as cool as the governor
And what's he driving?
in this issue. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that the biggest reason that they lose students in the Powerline Tech program is because they're afraid of heights. So I would suggest putting on one of those VR headsets first and then figuring out if you want to climb that pole. Perfect.
You may have mentioned this, but I didn't pick up. When you're talking about return on investment, what is the perspective of that return on investment? Is that state investment returned as revenue to the state, or are you evaluating that more broadly with economic impact?
We're evaluating this more broadly. So it's not just the revenue that's returned to the state, but it's the economic benefits returned to the entire state of Wyoming. This would come through income to workers, business owners. It's the benefits to gross state product.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was asking that because when you were pointing out specifically that manufacturing was not providing an ROI, we basically don't tax manufacturing. So I was wondering if it was from a revenue standpoint where that would be the revenue structure. But if it's more broadly the state economic impact, then that's an interesting point. Thank you.
Let me ask, you're trying to follow these dollars as they go through the economy and say how much economic activity is it generating, and you're counting new economic activity as a benefit. How do you measure how those dollars go through the economy? Do you have some standard parameters? How does that work?
So I've actually built one of these social accounting matrices once in my life in grad school. It was not fun. Behind each of these cells, there's multiple spreadsheets showing the different workers, the incomes they're receiving, and their relationships to different industries, elasticities of demand and supply. There's a lot of numbers that go into that, but that's proprietary information that we're not privileged to from InPlan. So I don't know exactly what numbers they use. I would assume that InPlan goes into the literature, pulls out elasticities that are average across multiple studies that fit the state or whatever. But yeah, it's.
So you're using commercially available figures that have been developed as to how this works and not necessarily getting specific information, where do your inputs come from?
I can go ahead and take it to, Mr. Chairman, we use IMPLAN, which uses publicly available information. So it's government estimates on how different industries are linked together across the US. And they do this state by state and county by county. And so they know if a particular product is produced in Wyoming, they can trace back all the inputs used in that, the workers that are employed in making that product and how much they get paid. And so they use past data on products being produced in Wyoming, and they can trace all of the dollars that are used in producing that good or service. And then that's what we use. So for these new programs, there are new workers, there's new equipment being purchased, and we can trace back using those federal statistics that is embedded in this IMPLAN software to form our estimates. And then as economists, our job is to interpret those, to look at them, make sure they make sense, and then interpret those numbers. Hope that makes some sense.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz has a question.
Okay. Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to add on to that, how do you know that you're not taking credit for what private industry has done? That this was a natural progression, that it was something industry was already doing, and that, how do you tie it back specifically to WIP? Because it's a fairly new program. And as you being economists, it takes a while for things to work their way through the economy. So how can WIP take credit for this? Where's the actual proof that this wasn't just, private industry, capitalism, that type of thing? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'll go ahead and take a shot at that. That's a good question. I think we feel pretty confident that the benefits that we're associating with WIP are directly caused by WIP. That's what we meant by taking a conservative approach. So these are new programs that were developed to solve bottlenecks in the workforce in Wyoming. And so these programs didn't exist before. And so WIP dollars were used to create those programs, and then there were benefits, and we just measured the benefits we felt comfortable doing. But it's a good question, because if WIP wasn't around, the question is, would private industry have solved these problems themselves? And that's a question we just can't answer. That's a sort of a counterfactual that would take some more time. But what we feel comfortable doing is saying that the benefits that we measure and the return on investment are directly caused by WIP funds.
And a lot of that comes from doing our homework and meeting with these project leads to figure out if their students came from out of state, if they came from in-state, if they left the state, what they spent their dollars on, all that stuff, to try to figure out what was a true impact from WIP and what was not. For example, that School of Computing example I brought up, where they got more grant dollars after WIP, but we weren't able to tie that directly to WIP because they also received other pools of money. And so we can't really separate those different pools of money out, so we didn't include them in the study.
Any further? Okay, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to just walk through the rest of the Phase 2 report because that was specific to the return on investment. So a large part of the WIP efforts on my end have been collecting, tracking, and utilizing data and metrics to gauge how we are doing and ensuring that the outcomes that have been set forth by the applications that we provided funding to are meeting expectations. So I wanted to explain that each of our funded programs meets with our project management team within their categories monthly. This is an effort to build collaboration, to share ideas across the state, and then also to keep everybody on the same page and moving in the right direction. Each of these programs also report quarterly on the identified metrics and outcomes for their programs. So the image that you will see on this screen, and it is also on page 3 in your report, which is this. This is all of the programs collaboratively put together for the metrics. So within the report, I'd like to point out that each category on each page has a QR code that is website page specific for their category. There's a small amount of detail within the report, but there's a lot more on the website. We weren't able to put everything in the report, or we would have had a 100-page report. All of the metrics outlined in the report are really exciting. However, I'd like to just kind of walk through each of them and then answer any questions. On page 5, I would really like to point out the K-12 engagement, as well as the K-12 teacher engagement metrics. On page 7, I would like to point out the K-12 student engagement, as well as the 287 business and industry partnerships, and the $4 million in outside funding investments for this category. On page 9, the energy category.
We're having, the pages aren't numbered. We're having different.
In the report, they are, sir?
Okay,
Sorry.
So it's not this document.
Correct. I'll let you catch up, Mr. Chairman. It was on page 9 was the last one. So the energy category on page 9, I would like to highlight the number of degrees and the credentials awarded after just 1 year of this or just the second year of this program. On page 11 for our entrepreneurship program category, I would like to highlight the number of training participants, the number of entrepreneurs supported, and the number of K-12 student outreach. On page 13, highlighting the healthcare programs, there were 8 certifications earned in one of the programs, and that led to all 8 of those students being employed in Wyoming from that program. On page 15, the community outreach for tourism and hospitality is a great highlight. The impacts of manufacturing, which is kind of in, it doesn't speak to the ROI for manufacturing, but the impacts of manufacturing via our metrics on page 17 show that there are big impacts across the state in almost all of the categories that we measured. Internships significantly increase changes of employment within those who host their internship. On page 19, you can see that through WIP, there were 138 internships provided in Wyoming to Wyoming students. And that category was in workforce development. The virtual reality program, which was a very hard one to measure, and it's a very robust program and just getting kicked off, which is on the next page, page 21. It's got some pretty big things happening, and we haven't been able to measure a lot of them yet. However, we can share that the 2,000 Wyoming industry employees who received the training through VR, these are miners, they're working in Gillette and coal country, and they were able to safely do some MSHA training and OSHA training through these VR headsets, which lessens the cost for our industries and increases safety for our workers across the state. I am happy. Oh, I'd like to talk about phase 3 if there's no questions on phase 2 metrics. Mr. Chairman, phase 3 is just kicking off. It started at the beginning of July, and it supports all of the previous workforce categories. Because the focus is on sustainability, we only funded one new program in phase 3, which is the nuclear program. That is a partnership with Western Wyoming Community College and the University of Wyoming. Are there any questions that you have for me? And I'll turn it over to 2 of our different programs to talk about what they've been doing with WIP funding.
Your committee, your funding is what, a specific appropriation?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, so we requested 30 million at the last biennium budget. We received 15 from Joint Appropriations Committee and then approved to the legislature. And so it is in the budget for the biennium. All right, I'm going to turn it over to, actually, I'm going to turn it over to our CEA folks if they are online. That would be Carmelina and Ethan.
They are online. Give me just one moment.
Wonderful. And this is back to the presentation that you guys have a copy of.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lauren, for the invitation. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and member of the committee. I'm Carmela Guadagno. I'm from University of Wyoming, where I direct the Center for Plant Growth and Phenotyping Facility, and I'm Assistant Director for the CA Center. I'm also with an adjunct position in the Department of Botany, and I've been leading for University of Wyoming the phase 2 and now phase 3 of the WIP for Control Environment Agriculture, what we call CEA. And today we'll be talking to you about some of our successes, along with Ethan Page, my collaborators from the Central Wyoming College. Before we get started, I wanted to just give you some background information about control environment agriculture. When we talk about what we call CA, we actually utilize a very large umbrella term. With CA, we are talking about different type of method of agricultural methodology and also different type of formats. Some of them we are all very familiar with, such as the soil cultivation or the greenhouses that is actually a big industry for our state. However, nowadays we have many more types of formats, such as the indoor agriculture with vertical towers, different type of methodologies such as the hydroponics and so on. So within each method for CA, there is an incredible range of both sizes of the utilized spaces, but especially the degree of technology can be very different. So if you have a very traditional greenhouse, that will fall under the umbrella of CA, but the level of technology of that greenhouse will be much more different than a very large indoor farming structure, but they both belong to the same field of CA. One of the reasons why we actually, if we can move on to the next slide, one of the reasons why we thought that actually having a WIP focus in CA could have been a great idea for the state is actually that a workforce development in CA is currently much needed, not only for our state, but is really relevant globally. So although a lot of new and more modern type of industry for CA have been developing, and we are actually all very interested in having new ways to build a sustainable agriculture, there is a global current lack in a skilled workforce for CA. And this is historically been true. And I actually want to point back to what the economists just talked about, that actually for the agriculture, we haven't seen much of a return. Well, actually, some of the programs, such as for CA, they are inexistent, not only in the United States, but also globally. The reason behind the lack of a skilled workforce and also the lack of curricula in CA is actually the fact that the CA itself, since I showed you how technological different the field can be, is actually high interdisciplinary. So when you think about the produce and agriculture, much often we just simply need about plants or cattle, right, or other animals. What we need to think about nowadays is actually that the CA not only covers plant science, general ag field, but it also needs a lot of tasks needs to be achieved through learning knowledge of engineering, businesses, computer science, biochemistry, nutrition. You can really think of pretty much every single field and every single department that we have, in this case, UW, could actually be in some way becoming part of a CA curriculum. This is, as I said, a global need, especially for the United States as well, where agriculture is highly important, but also is a big need for the state of Wyoming, when the indoor agriculture and such as greenhouses have actually been always faced with a very challenging environment. So some tough facts of Wyoming that I just put here to remind everybody is that over an entire year, we have 178 degrees temperature extreme across the state. So basically half of the time we have an extreme in temperature in some part of the state. And also Wyoming represents the second most volatile state for weather fluctuation due to the presence of prairies, high winds, high altitude, and so on. So we all knew that actually CEA is asking for a skilled workforce development. And when we move to the next slide, you will see how during the phase 2, we actually started collaborating with the main partner of the Central Wyoming College. Actually, all other community colleges around the state were aware of the effort. And then for the phase 3, we will be able to actually already have letter of support and start building relationship with the other colleges as well. But the way we build the deliverables for phase 2 were actually meant to overcome this lack of a workforce in CEA over time. So the first deliverable was actually complete a phenotyper infrastructure. This is a high technological infrastructure that for now has been purchased, but is still in the making, and it will be delivered in the facility, the plant growth and phenotyping facility that I direct at University of Wyoming that you can see on the bottom left. And this will actually allow not only the students, the researcher, but also businesses around the area to come and take technologically high technological measurements for their plants that are highly needed in businesses related to CEA. So it is research, but it's also teaching, so workforce development and business, building business opportunities. The second was starting to host some workshop at University of Wyoming in collaboration with businesses. And we did this last spring with Plenty Unlimited, and we started from Plenty, that is one of the biggest indoor farms in the world, but especially because they have their research and development in Laramie, and the state itself had already put $20 million in Plenty for them to build their new R&D facility. The third deliverable, and the conference actually was a great success. So we had not only students, but a lot of researchers, both from the industry and from the academia, coming from one of the first time together to actually find some point in common to actually develop this sort of new workforce development. As a third deliverable, we started to involve more teachers. So at least we start fishing in conferences such as the WACTI conference, and earlier today, actually members of the Association for Career and Technological Education were present in the same room. Well, at the conference, there were K-12 teachers, high school teachers, and we actually thought about this deliverable so to expose the students as early as possible in their career to the plethora of opportunities that CEA can actually give to them for a workforce. And here in the center, you can see two of the students at University of Wyoming that participated to that Plenty conference that I mentioned before. And they were also able to be hired for an internship throughout the semester by two different businesses in Wyoming. Here, I just left the website for our facility so that first of all, I invite you all to come and visit the facility at UW, but also if you want to follow up on the first deliverable of the phenotyper, you are welcome to do so from the website. The last deliverable that we are the most proud of is actually starting to pilot an actual interdisciplinary course at UW for 10 students in controlled environment agriculture. So in this case, this summer, the interdisciplinarity was actually built over the entire year, where we put together faculties and researchers and staff across 10 different departments at UW, and we built from scratch a new program, a new class. That we piloted this summer, and I will show you what we have actually done at UW for this past summer, but we are hoping to implement not only with CWC, but with the other colleges, so that the course can actually be taken by all students in Wyoming. If we move on to the next slide, we can actually, I wanted to give you just a little insights of different parts of this course that we built. The course itself that was called Research and Internship in CEA, and for this year was under a module in agriculture called Agri 4990, actually had different sections. The first main section was obviously lecture and integrated lab activities in the classroom at the Science Initiative building at University of Wyoming. What is important to say about the student that you see here, for this first year, we didn't select the student based on the year of based on the year in the school, but we actually left it open to just to gauge the interest of the student. And we actually ended up with a very surprising and great result from our point of view, because just as interdisciplinary the class was meant to be, the pool of students was very diverse. So the students themselves were coming from different departments. Once again, Department of Business, Energy, Renewable Resources, Computer Science, Engineering. We had students from different departments have an interest in this class. And this, I think, it was not a metric of success, but the metric was actually fill up the class, and we did, with actually even a waiting list for having new students. But the most important thing here is just gauging that the interest was already there, even when we were not offering this type of class before. After the students were working every day with different faculties and different researchers, they were actually taking care themselves of an entire life cycle for produce being produced on vertical towers that you can see here in number 2. So from seed to harvest, the student with our facility manager at the plant growth and phenotyping facility were able to actually deploy the instrumentation, taking care of the entire system. And I don't know how familiar you are with the hydroponic system, but I bet you sometimes something can go wrong, and the student actually took a good care, and they had a very high final yield for their produce. For instance, the other thing to point out is that this alchemy with the businesses goes throughout also our facility and the rest of the efforts that we are having in CEA at UW. So the vertical towers that you see here that were utilized for this course were actually the ones that Plenty Unlimited had donated to our facility 6 months ahead of time. So once again, try to create much more of an integrated response to this lack of workforce development. The other way that we have been trying in doing so is actually hosting our, during our class, a lot of guest lecturers, either online or in person, from the industries. So we actually had industries not only from Wyoming, but from around the United States, and consultants in CA that came to our class and actually talked to the students and answered their question, and actually spending 1, sometimes 2 days with the students, really showing them what they can do in CA that is to them so far still very unknown. And then another part of the course was actually the Plenty internship. And so This is really important because plenty actually had the student over for 2 weeks. So overall, we can say, moving to the next slide, that the course was an actual success. Of course, we don't intend specifically a metric of success, the large media coverage, but I wanted to point out that even the news, besides a lot of media coverage around the state, was even picked up by very well-known journal from the Netherlands in vertical farming, like the Vertical Farm Daily. The student satisfaction was amazing. As I said, they started without having really an idea of what they could do. And as you can see on the right, they're actually saying for the most part, and 80% was actually very now interested in CA and even intended to pursue a career in CA. We can move on. And actually, we can see some other metrics of success that just for this summer course, actually, besides the students that have expressed interest in continuing a curriculum in CA, 4 out of 10 students have actually been hired throughout campus in different departments as non-benefited employees. And so we indeed have created some jobs besides the internship that were given to the student that I mentioned at the very beginning. We are now thinking if we can move on to the phase 3, actually, to include more businesses in Wyoming. So I just skimmed through that landscape for CA in Wyoming. We have more businesses that work with CA. And the phase 3 is actually meant to create a network and a platform to put in collaboration all the different businesses with University of Wyoming and all community colleges, so to actually integrate with any other extramural funding that we can have to make this ecosystem more and more sustainable. And as I said, very importantly to reach out to those K-12 and technical teacher for the high school. And if we skip to the last one of the slides that I prepared, this is actually something that we can think about for the phase 3 for a long-term sustainability in terms of the economy. We are actually building an actual ecosystem. In this case, the supporting funding were represented by WIP, and the main part of this ecosystem are actually our communities that, as you can see, they are very diverse. So our main scope with phase 3 and beyond would actually be feeding these communities through entrepreneurship, community colleges, schools in general, university, so that we can form a better workforce in CA and bring in more and more jobs in Wyoming, but also keeping our students in Wyoming. And now Ethan Page will actually give you some more insight of what they have been in parallel done at CWC.
Thank you, Lena. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Ethan Page. I'm the instructor of local food and agriculture at Central Wyoming College. And if you want to flip to the next slide, please. We have started in the last 4 years an initiative called Grow Your Own, focusing on local food producers from growing food all the way up to value-added products. So this opportunity to receive funding in CEA really fits into that initiative that we've launched. I run a beginning farmer training program focused on outdoor production, and having the opportunity through WIP to add the CEA component has really, it's a really exciting time to be in agriculture and local food in this area. So next slide, please. So in phase 2, we received funding to sort of lay the groundwork for our CEA program, really focusing on infrastructure development and course development, and launching this partnership with UW. So The biggest and most exciting part of this is that we are receiving in the next 2 to 3 weeks now what's called a freight farm. It's a company based out of Boston. It's a hydroponic container farm. This is a fully self-contained unit. It can grow somewhere between 2 and 4 acres of produce a year round. And so being able to provide fresh produce to our community from, in the dead of winter is going to be very exciting. And being able to train, students and future workers in this area on this pretty high-tech piece of equipment is going to be a really exciting thing to work with. So as you've seen, there's a lot of components of CEA, and this kind of integrates a lot of them in the container farm. So it's controlled by software. There's a lot of plumbing and electrical involved. You can see some photos there. And it's just going to be very exciting to have that ability to have that produce around and teach with it. We'll be building another small greenhouse on site as well to demonstrate a few other growing techniques. But in phase 3, we've received funding for kind of that expansion and full rollout of our program. We have a manager position funded through that. We're going to finish our greenhouse and develop curriculum and finally hold classes in probably next fall, finally, once everything gets approved. Strengthening these industry collaborations and being that pipeline from education to workforce that we're hoping to become in this region. And really the goal of being a regional hub for CEA training, education, workforce development. So they have these wider effects of increasing that local food system resiliency, keeping some of those dollars local, and seeing those economic benefits, but also, having not only that, but health benefits from increasing the local food production and consumption as well. So yeah, that's my little bit on what's been happening at CWC. It's a pretty exciting time to be involved with local food.
We've lost our quorum.
Mr. Chairman, you do still have Representatives Allred and Berger and Senator Steinmetz online.
Okay, guess not quite. Okay, can we proceed and get this wrapped up?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. I realize that we're the only thing standing between you all and lunch, so thank you for your time. My name is Brandon Cosine, and I'm the interim president of Casper College, and I am pleased to be able to present the Addiction Studies program at Casper College to you, which is a WIP Phase 2 program. Just real quickly on the first slide, I tried to show what the problem is in Wyoming when it comes to not just mental health, but a lot of times we forget to talk about substance abuse issues and the lack of substance abuse counselors that we have in the state. So as you can see, the Wyoming suicide rates are about double what the national average is. While we are slightly above average meeting the mental health needs in Wyoming at 47.1%, we're only meeting about 32.2% of the state needs when it comes to substance abuse treatment. And that last part down below also just provides some context of the number of mental health licenses that are held in each one of the different areas governed by the Mental Health Professions Licensing Board. So the first one is licensed professional counselor, then clinical social work, marriage and family therapy, and as you can see, the bottom one, the LAT, is the licensed addiction therapist. We have significantly lower number of licenses in addictions therapy, as well as the number of provisional licenses who will become fully licensed after they meet the clinical supervision and hours that they need to be fully licensed. Going to the next slide, Casper College was awarded $112,000 approximately in phase 2, and we really had 3 focuses of our project. The first and primary one was to create a pipeline and a pathway for addictions practitioners to enter at different stages in the practice of substance abuse treatment. So at Casper College, we offer an associate degree in addiction studies, which is NASAC accredited. NASAC is a national accreditation agency that says that we meet all the standards and everything of a quality program. And when a student gets done with that associate degree, they can sit for the Certified Addiction Practitioner Assistant license. which means that they can assist a certified or licensed person when they're providing therapy or group therapy services. And then if you go across, the CAP or Certified Addiction Practitioner, that's at the bachelor's degree level. And so if a student completes our coursework or program and then gets a bachelor's degree in a mental health or human services area, they can sit to become basically what is a substance abuse counselor, where they can diagnose and treat substance use disorders, but they cannot treat duly diagnosed like a mental health disorder like depression, anxiety, those kinds of things. And then keep moving down the pipeline is the licensed addiction therapist. This is at the master's level. Again, if a practitioner completes our coursework and then also completes like a master's degree in social work or professional counseling, they're also eligible to sit for the LAT licensing exam and license. The second goal of our program is to provide improved clinical training. At the college, we did not have any kind of recording software or recording apparatus or software to be able to send students in, do mock therapy sessions, and then have a supervisor evaluate those sessions later with the students. So we're in the process of purchasing that and creating a mental health lab for our students at the college. And then the third one was just truly to increase the number of qualified addiction practitioners in Wyoming at all levels, from the associate degree level all the way to the master's level, so that we could try to meet the needs that we have in the state for substance use. And so one of the interesting things that we did, if you are like a licensed professional counselor, but you've never had any addiction-specific education, we actually provide NADAC-approved addiction studies education access to that, so that those practitioners can go get their CEUs to get the educational requirements in the different areas as outlined by the Mental Health Professions Licensing Board, and then they can sit for the license and be qualified to provide substance abuse services. We're also encouraging those folks to obtain that second license by providing vouchers for them to get that second license. So, for example, I'm a licensed professional counselor and a licensed addictions therapist. My initial license is $125. I have to pay another $75 for that second license and complete some specific hours in addictions therapy and all of that. I don't really need that LAT license because I can do everything under my LPC, but this just qualifies me and demonstrates that I am qualified to provide substance abuse services. So finally, on the last slide, a few direct outcomes that we have. Currently, we've identified 16 individuals who are interested in pursuing the LAT license. So that's in the regional area, primarily Natrona County. And we have offered 18 scholarships to our undergraduate students at Casper College in the Addiction Studies program. Some other outcomes, this directly ties to the governor's mental health and healthcare workforce initiatives. I also sit on that and work with Jen Davis a lot on these issues. And we've partnered with the Natrona County substance use providers to provide some feedback on what we're doing in these areas. Again, not everyone is going to get all of the educational hours to become an LAT, but at least if they're doing some of the free education that we're providing, they'll be more qualified to be treating folks who have substance use disorders in our communities. And then also, probably one of the biggest things is that we're really marketing a path for students to see that if I get my associate degree, I can go to work with that degree and start working in the field. And then if I continue, I get additional levels of responsibility and licensure, which hopefully they will go to the master's level so they can practice independently. But it just gets students in the workforce much quicker than not. And I will entertain any questions.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz has a question.
Okay, proceed, Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Took me a minute to get unmuted. And this is a general question, so I'm not sure who is there that might be able to answer it, and I could probably look this up, but how much money overall over all the phases of WIP have we spent, number one? And number two, then these seem to be ongoing programs because we're building greenhouses, we're doing all of these things. And so how do you intend to fund these going forward? Will there be a request in your standard budget? What exactly is the plan going forward? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Steinmetz, thank you for that question. So many of these programs are very expensive to stand up. However, once students are enrolled and receiving the tuition and fees, they'll be able to self-sustain themselves. And each college, especially Casper College, they've gone year by year. They've not requested a second year of funding for any of their WIP funding. They've been able to sustain moving forward each year. So it's been 55 million has been the total investment so far. And that doesn't count the 15 million that we are in the process of with for phase 3. I think, did I answer all of your questions, Senator? Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, we have one more that's the advanced manufacturing. Thank you.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Rachel Chatterton. I'm Dean for the School of Business and Industry at Casper College. And so I'm here to talk to you a little bit about our advanced manufacturing program that has received funding in WIP Phase 2 and 3. And I will try to be very quick because I know you have been here for quite some time. In Phase 2, we received a little over $570,000. I think we'll skip that video just in the interest of time, but there's some great videos that really highlight the programs. And so in Phase 2, we have an existing machine tool technology and a manufacturing technology program, both of which we've struggled with enrollment, but we know there's demand for a skilled workforce that needs that training. And so we've been talking over quite a few years on how we can integrate those two programs. The biggest challenge was trying to add automation to get it to where it's going to actually meet the growing industry needs and the changing industry needs. And we didn't have the equipment to do that. And WIP really made that possible. The bulk of our funding was in acquiring equipment. You'll see the list there on the slide. But we also really focused on business and industry engagement, enhancing our partnerships and outreach opportunities, and then really focusing on student success. And so this is a list of the 13 companies that we have been engaged with over this last year. They have representation on our advisory boards. They've helped with the design of our lab space, making choices for the equipment, how we should be placing it. They've also been great at doing site tours and really bringing what manufacturing looks like to the attention of a wide audience. And we could not do this work without them. I mean, business and industry engagement and outreach and partnerships is kind of part and parcel of what we do all the time in the community colleges. But this grant really enabled us to put that at the forefront. One of the companies we worked with, Endovascular Instruments, they are a local medical equipment and design company. And they're trying to create this new medical instrument, and they need some fixturing to be able to do that. So we partnered with them and used our 3D metal printer to do this. This is a time-lapse video, and so it took about 6 hours to do this. We used a GoPro camera so we could do the time-lapse. So that is in the metal 3D printer making that, and you see on the picture down on the left hand, that's the finished product. This is just, we don't have to watch this whole thing, but this is, once it got done, it's all that metal shavings that then you have to brush away to get to those parts, and then you have to release them from the plate that they were made on. But it's really an intriguing process. I had not seen a metal 3D printer before. I think we've seen like the plastic 3D printers, but to see the metal printers, it's just up to the ballgame and what we can do with this. We also have some other businesses, Legacy Molding. They're going to be looking at our CMM machine and looking to see if that might be something they want to introduce into their facility. Austin Engineering and Power Service and DNOW are looking at adding cobots into their facilities with their welding machines, as well as their manufacturing. And they're kind of looking to us to help them see how those work, and ideally also having that confidence that we have this equipment now that we're training students on so they can be assured they're going to have a skilled employee. So with the partnerships and outreach, over this past year too, we partnered with Manufacturing Works and held a Manufacturing Day event last October. We're hoping to do it again this year. And we had about 60 students from the Natrona County School District and Casper College that toured around 6 different facilities in our community. Again, getting to see a whole variety of manufacturing facilities and what they do and what manufacturing really looks like and what a career in these fields could be. We've done a lot of workshops and open houses, bringing in school district teachers, our own faculty, students, and our industry partners to play around with the machine. The 3D metal printer was the first one, and when the vendor came and did the training, we invited them all in so they could partake in that. And then one of the really fun things we did this summer is we have an event on campus called Key Camp. Key stands for Knowledge, Enrichment, and Youth, and it is designated for 7th through 8th grade students. They come from all over the state. I think some even come from outside of our state. And they have 2 different weeks they can attend. They stay on campus in the dorms, and they get this immersive experience and kind of like a mini college experience with a lot of hands-on activities. And they had a career exploration piece of this, and so our instructor demonstrated our cobot, and he programmed it to serve them cookies. And so this is a really fun video to get a whole generation of students seeing what advanced manufacturing and what this could look like. And so they tap the robot and then it goes, or the cobot, and then it goes down, picks up the cookie, and it serves it to them. It's been kind of a hit. We've had requests to do it at other events as well. And ultimately, none of this would be worth it if we couldn't really highlight student success. So we have had some students that have really immersed themselves into these machinery. They are fairly new, so we don't really even have the curriculum built. But this individual student right here, he designed a bike stem on the computer, I think using CAD and SolidWorks, programmed the 3D printer for it, printed it. That one took 17 hours. It printed all night. And then you can see the picture, it's actually on his bike and it works and he uses it and it connects his handlebars to his bike fork. And this is a student who's finishing up this year and he has his goals set on being an entrepreneur, wants to start his own company in design and manufacturing. And then this student, Alexander Brown, he is in the video. He placed 4th at Skills National in Atlanta. He won the state competition here in Wyoming in CNC programming. We had that competition on our campus. When that qualified him to go to Atlanta, and he placed 4th in the nation. And so it's a testament to his involvement in our programs, working on this equipment, so it elevated his skill. And we just found out last week that he is now employed at Austin Engineering in their design and manufacturing department. So as we move forward into phase 3, we have a little, again, almost, a little over $500,000. We're building off of what we're already have done. We've realized there's even more equipment we can be adding, so we can do even more advanced manufacturing work and training. So we'll be adding that equipment. One of those pieces of equipment, our goal is to place at Pathways Innovation Center so they can have a machine there and we can introduce curriculum for the students at Pathways in CNC manufacturing, have some additional articulated dual and enrollment classes so we can get a pipeline of students earlier interested in this field and then coming up to the college and getting involved in our programs. And we'll be doing a lot more with curriculum development, training CTE teachers, training our industry partners, and having more open houses just so more people can see what this machinery can do, what the skilled technicians are able to do, and what this career path can really mean for our state. We'll train the trainer, teach the teacher, and just really be a resource from everything from the K-12 into our college and into the workforce.
Okay. Committee? Let me ask the 2 Casper College individuals a question. If the budget for the RIDE program disappears, are your programs sustainable long-term through the normal community college funding mechanisms?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, yes. Any of the WIP dollars that we have asked for, we've made sure that we're able to sustain on the other side of this if any of the dollars were to go away. And so I'm confident that we will be able to.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would echo that statement. As I mentioned, we had these existing programs. We didn't need to stand up a new program, hire new faculty. We're using existing faculty that will continue on this. Now, the equipment obviously has to be maintained, but this equipment has a pretty good shelf life. We really made sure that it was stuff that was going to last.
So you were able to use it for sort of one-time funding? type
Correct.
Things for enhancements that you needed?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Chairman Northrup?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to comment on WIP in general. I know that the local college where I live, Northwest College, has used this to stand up a CDL instruction course, and that course is wildly popular. They have many people in waiting. I've heard there's upwards to 70 or 80 on the waiting list, and that's about what they have in the course. They've bought trucks and bought trucks and bought trucks, but the WIP stood up the first truck and the first trailer and got that program started. So it was a great way to get this off the shelf and onto the road, kind of to say, and it was a tremendous return on those dollars that were put into the WIP program.
Anything more? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Do we have any further public comment? Do we have any further public comment? Going once, going twice. Okay, that completes the work of the committee, I believe. Have we missed anything, Aliso, that you know of, committee members? Okay, we're adjourned.